All right, are we ready to call the meeting to order? We need an action item to adopt today's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
We also need a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting, if you have a chance to read them.
Move approval of the minutes. Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. This is time for public comment. And this is an opportunity for the public to comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda of the meeting and is within the jurisdiction of the Teachers Retirement Board. However, the board may not take action on any issues raised unless it's included on the agenda and public comment has been allowed. If issues are raised that would require board action, the issue would need to be included on the agenda for a future meeting. Public matter does not include disability applications or contested cases or other adjudicated proceedings. Thank you, Diane, for coming,
And Sherry.
Sherry, you're here too. Thank you for coming today. All right. We're ready for our 2019 actuarial evaluation.
Pretty boring presentation. Nothing crazy. So they're the best kind.
We like boring ones.
Yeah.
Thank you. No controversy, no
Exactly.
bad news, no.
I remember in the 90s, you go to these meetings and, yeah, you're 120% funded. They'd be, stop right there and get out.
See what you can do about getting there next time.
Yeah, that's what works.
We're ready for another one of those.
Well, we can put any number in there for estimates. I mean, it doesn't have to be thanks again for having us. Led us to deliver the results for the 2019 valuation. I'm going to start it off, and then I'm going to kick it over to Joey. Besides me and Joey, we have two other people, actually three other people on the team. But you know, Joey's been working on your guys' account for a long time. So we start off with the basic retirement funding equation, and what this does is just summarize what we do as the actuary. On the left-hand side, we have the C plus I, so that's contributions and investment income.
So what Todd's working off of is this staple. Everybody got that?
So on the left-hand side, we have the contributions and investment income, and on the right-hand side, you have the benefit payments and expenses that come out. This equation has to always be in balance, because in order to pay benefits, you have to have some money on the left-hand side to pay them. What we don't know, because this is a defined benefit plan, is what are those benefit payments going to actually be, because somebody has to make it to retirement eligibility, and then they have to make a decision to retire. After that, it's how long are they going to live to receive that benefit. So that's what we do as the actuary. We estimate that the future benefit payment stream, and we come up with a liability, and then from there we determine if the statutory contributions are sufficient to fund that. 60 to 70% of what gets paid out actually comes from investment income. So I always say this, but you know, as an actuary, I think we're professional savers essentially. So we help you kind of determine what the cost is going to be out in the future, and then how to save for that essentially. If we go to the next slide, the benefits, the B part depends on your plan provisions and your experience. So how do people, you know, how their working careers go, decisions on when to retire. In the short term, the contribution side really just depends on the actuarial assumptions and cost method, because we're making estimates. But in the long term, the contributions, you could actually do a full accounting. So if you wanted to close the plan today and wait till the last person passed away is receiving a benefit, you can go back and do an accounting and say, well, how much did this plan cost? And you could just back into it based on what the other three items are. That's kind of the reality of the defined benefit pension plan. So you know, you really can't run away from that cost back function. You know, it is what it is in the long term. Just a few comments on the valuation. The market asset return was 5.69% versus the assumed rate of 7.5%, so it's 1.8% less than what we expected. On the actuarial side, which smooths gains or losses over a 4-year period. It was slightly higher, it was at 7% versus the 7.5%. So, and that difference is just attributed to hanging on to some gains essentially from the prior years that we're using to offset some of the losses. So, and then we had a big loss drop off, and this year replaced it with a smaller loss. So that kind of worked in our favor as well. Right now, the market value of assets is, if I'm looking at this from 1,000 feet, I'd say the market value and actuarial value are pretty equal. So you're looking at $770,000 difference essentially. That's a very small loss that's going to be recognized over the next 3 years. Next year should be a small gain, followed by 2 small losses, if everything holds up. And then finally, we had the funded ratio increase from 68.19% to 68.63%, so a slight increase in that funded ratio, which is always good. And the amortization period, that's the amount of time it's going to take to pay off the unfunded if all the assumptions are met. That decreased from 31 to 29. We would typically expect that to go down in single-year increments, but this year it went down in 2. Some of that is driven by some good experience, and some of that's driven by the fact that mathematically there's not a lot of difference between 31 and 29. It's just a small deviation can create, a jump by more than 1. So we wouldn't. So there's no issues there. And then finally, and I'm going to turn it over to Joey. We changed. There was a change in from the previous year, and that's the GABA for the Tier 2 members. We were assuming 1.5% versus the 0.5% that they're eligible to receive today. And the reason why we changed that is because it was my understanding that in order for them to get the higher GABA as the funded status improved, those were automatic increases, but it turns out that you guys actually have to approve it, and we have to do an impact statement because it can't drop it down below the 80% after you grant it. So it's not an automatic increase, so we feel that we should just change how we're doing it. And that did help contribute to reducing that amortization period a little bit as well. And it decreased the unfunded by $6.1 million. So a small shave off there. There's not a lot of Tier 2 members receiving benefits right now, so it doesn't have much of an impact. But there's the reasoning behind the motivation behind making the change. And with that, I'm turning it over to Joe.
Starting on slide 8, this is just basically we're going to go over some data elements, statistics for trends just over the last 10 to 12 years and valuations. I won't spend a lot of time on it. If you have any questions, we can definitely dig into it. But since 2007, the active membership has increased on an average 0.7% per year. It's been relatively flat over that time period. As opposed to retirees, you got 3% average increase in retirees over that same period. And 0.6 retirees per active member 12 years ago, and now it's 0.8 with a mature plan. And that's what you would expect to see as retirees begin to retire and baby boomers and so forth. So
You kind of expect the same rate of change over the next couple of decades, moving towards the 1.0.
That just depends on the growth of your active membership. So when we do the valuation, so we can tell you what the B is going to be. The one thing we can't tell you are what hiring practices are going to be, or those types of things.
Right,
So,
but you use estimates for those sorts of things, right? And you don't assume as you do these that there's any change on down the road, correct?
well, I mean, it's definitely getting closer to
Right.
the one. So, yeah, but I would tell you though, that's why you've accumulated these assets too. So
Right.
you do want to spend your money.
I don't see it as a problem, it's just
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a trend that we're seeing across the country. So will it hit the exactly one? I don't, it's probably not exactly, but, it might get close.
And the growth in Montana could change too.
It could.
Really,
Yeah,
Probably the biggest factor for us is just the longevity of life.
yeah.
yeah, you're pretty healthy here. So,
moving on to slide 9. This shows the average salary and benefits over this time period as well. 1.7% increase in average salary since 2007 to 55,231 average annual salary. That's an average over just the entire membership.
So when you're projecting forward costs, do you use those looking back assumptions on growth rates, or?
We base it on our actuarial assumptions on the salary scale. So we
Yeah,
based on the updated.
I mean, where that would really be important is the payroll growth assumption. And so we would, when we do our analysis of that assumption, that would be our starting point for sure. And then we'd want to know from you, like, well, what do you think? I mean, you understand your population better than we would. And so we'd want to know from you, do you think you're going to see growth, to give us a reason to have it be higher,
Yeah.
essentially.
Well, that can be impacted by future legislative changes potentially, but it's hard to predict those.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's been a 2.7% average benefit increase since 2007. Again, the gap is 1.5. As people continue to get higher salaries, people are retiring with higher benefits and those sorts of things. So,
Just to go back to that question, this year your total payroll did actually exceeded the assumption this year. So,
yeah, and on slide 10, as Todd was mentioning, this is just the full-time payroll. Excuse me, the full-time payroll, but the valuation payroll includes part-time as well. But like Todd mentioned, it was a 3.4% average or total increase in total payroll since the last valuation. But over the last 10 years, it's averaged about 2.3% per year.
And that again is just the total money provided by employers. So that may reflect a jillion things. Could be more employees, could be raises.
could be catch-up raises.
Exactly.
But since you're contributing on a percent payroll, that also affects the contributions coming into the plan. So. And moving on to slide 11, this just shows the history of the assets and the rates of return. Obviously, in 2008 and 9, we had the Great Recession. The 15-year average is in our report. The average market return over the 15 years is 6.7%. The actuarial return is 6.3%, and that takes into account the negative, 20% in 2008. So that was definitely an anomaly there. So. And your market value and actuarial value are almost identical now. You can see the lines are converging. So there's as Todd mentioned, there's very little difference in market and actuarial value. I think you have next year it's around 28 million gain. Assuming you hit your actuarial rate of return, there's a gain that's going to be recognized. 28 million followed by 2 losses in the following 2 years. And on slide 12, this just shows a summary of the results from 2018 to 2019. The normal cost rate did drop. I'll just point out a few of the changes. The normal cost rate dropped by 18 basis points, 0.18%. A lot of that was attributed to the change in the method, from Tier 2 GABA. And you also get the increase in 1% employer contribution. So there was an additional 0.28 to amortize the unfunded, which lowered the amortization period from 31 to 29 years, which is definitely good.
One thing to point out there is just an interesting tidbit about the Tier 2 members. Based on the demographics of how they're coming in, at the 1.5% GABA rate, there's really no cost savings to Tier 2 right now. So as as was anticipated back when it was implemented. So the savings there is really just due to the reduction in the assumed GABA right now. So. And that's just a demographic change. People are coming in at different ages based on the population. We did those impact statements back in 11 and 13. So
The actual savings really takes 30 years. come about anyway.
Well,
That's when they
yeah,
start
well,
retiring.
the savings would come about by replacing your current membership with new
Right.
Tier 2 members with lower normal rates. But if everything being equal, if everybody's receiving similar benefits, including the 1.5% full GABA, based on the demographics of how people are coming in, that savings is not as much as what was anticipated. So.
I was thinking about instead of 25, now it's 30 years. And those
It's
other
30 years,
factors.
yeah. No, it does push it out, but they also get the bigger benefit if they stay.
They do the 30.
They do the 30, so most people are going to stay and do the 30.
Diane?
I have a question. Given that I represent members, and I know a lot of new members are coming in and getting that 0.5% GABA as they retire, and there are a few of them that are, how long can we anticipate it will be before we reach those benchmarks where the board can consider increasing the GABA?
Based on some projections that we've done, I mean, 20 years or more.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
that's,
going to be quite some time, so.
thank you.
Is that a legislative thing?
So we have to be at least 90% funded in order to increase
Yeah.
it, and any increase can't drop us below 85% funded. So
Yeah, so like,
the TRS board would be the ones, when
It was
we
part
get
of
to
the
that
legislative
point,
thing. I don't
we would
remember.
have Kavanaugh McDonald cost it out
Yeah.
and give us exactly, this is what you would, if you go from 0.5 to 1.0 or 0.5 to 1.5, this is what it costs and this is what it does to your funded status.
It was part of House Bill 377,
Yeah.
the funding bill in 2013, so.
Okay.
But it's still going to be decades before a mass number of people in Tier 2 actually start to retire. You know, you'll have the few that come in at, let's say, a not normal starting age and retire based on the years instead of the 30-plus years. Now, it's going to be at least 25 more years before a mass number of people
And the sad
retire.
part is it'll be that entire time entirely that gap is going to be able to be addressed. So everybody that's retiring before that's not going to see much of a change GABA-wise, and they're the ones that aren't going to get the 2%
Right.
Right.
to start with.
Claire.
So that's
I don't know that when you're starting at 60, I don't know that you're really thinking of, or 50 even, you're really thinking about getting to your full retirement benefits regardless. I don't know.
Well, no. I sure don't want to be working.
Yeah.
it'd be rough. Well, that interesting about that though, just about retirement in general, some people who may not like have saved for retirement and don't have a pension say, oh, well, I'll just work until I'm 80. Well, it turns out that most people can't because they're not healthy enough to do it. And the average worker leaving the workforce is in their early 60s due to health-related issues. Like they just can't do the same job anymore. So you can be very optimistic, but it's not. Probably not going to happen in that rosy kind of a view. So again, it's important to save for retirement. So.
Oh, we'll go over slide 13 now, which just shows the breakdown of the gain loss items. There was a total loss. These are offsetting most of these. There was a total loss of $20.7 million. There were liability losses and also a small investment loss. But the largest item on there you'll see is a data adjustment and benefit payment timing. We did make a correction last year on some retirees, deceased pending, I guess you would say, the members that were still pending settlement. We valued those as both an annuity and a lump sum, which if there was a single life, I guess they're just waiting to be settled in a lump sum. So there was just a small change there.
Yeah, so if they had a lump sum amount of $60,000, let's say, we were valuing it as a life annuity for this small group. So that person would have a liability of like $3 million. So we fixed it so the liability now is only that refund that's supposed to take place. It just has to happen.
Yeah, I believe we started getting the deceased pending over the last couple of years. It's a new data
Right. So
field.
It was, it was an enhancement in our system that it's a way to classify people that they're not settled out yet, but they're deceased pending settlement. And so that status would have been starting to show up in your report.
And we did add a table in the data section to show those counts, just so, because they're not really retirees, they're still pending settlement.
So overall, it's, compared to the total accrued liability of $6 billion, I mean, these are pretty small numbers, so.
And the next two slides just show the cash flow history and also the projected cash flow. 8 of the last 11 years, you've had positive cash flow. Obviously, in 2009, in the Great Recession, there was a huge investment loss. And moving on to slide 15, we're projecting, obviously that you're going to have positive cash flow. This is assuming that you're going to hit the 7.5%. Everything's going to work out as far as the assumptions that we're assuming. There are obviously going to be deviations from that. That's one thing we know, is that's not going to be exactly like what we're projecting, but assuming that everything works out as expected.
So, just to finish this off, I got some real boring stuff. So, one of the things that we're going to be working with coming up here is called a risk analysis, and a lot of this is driven by this new actuarial standards of practice. It's called ASOP number 51. I'm not going to go through slide to slide in great detail, because it's really just to give you just an introduction and then maybe just demonstrate some of the things that we can see. The first slide just talks about the makeup of the Actuarial Standards Board, essentially. The next slide talks about the Actuarial Standards Board's committees. So there's different, ranges from pension all the way down to, enterprise risk management. That's fairly new, kind of like a really risk intensive, like a lot of life insurance companies and banking now use people who have studied this stuff. It's kind of interesting, but it was too late for me to see. The next slide just talks about the purpose of these actuarial standards of practice, and basically it's just to identify what an actuary should consider, document, disclose when performing actuarial assignments. It sets the standards for appropriate practice. So, and really, these are meant for other actuaries, so they're not really meant for you. Actuaries, essentially, we police ourselves. We don't have an organization like the federal government doesn't license us. We have we have to pass our own exams, and then we basically police ourselves, essentially. And that's the whole reason for these standards, essentially. So the next slide talks about all the different standards of practice that are used for doing an actuarial evaluation of your type. And you can see they range from the introduction, which tells you about these standards, and it goes all the way down to asset valuation methods, and then this new one, disclosure of risk. So what makes ASOP 51 kind of interesting is it's not really for other actuaries. It's for the reader of the report, the user, to understand that, hey, you need to be aware if there's a risk. You need to be aware of it just so you can be comfortable with doing your job. So I would say that when it comes to risk, you can't avoid risk. You can, if you try to be risk-free, then you really might as well just be a pay-as-you-go plan, essentially. So by taking some risk, it helps you reduce some of the costs. So you don't want to be taking too much risk without making sure you're not getting properly rewarded for taking that risk, essentially. Just a couple updates before we get into here. The biggest thing is that there's ASOP 4, 27, and 35. So 27 is investment return or economic assumptions, 35 is demographic assumptions, and then 4 is just measuring the measurement of pension obligations. They've been going through a whole big renovation, essentially, and they'll be out in final form probably sometime this year. They were the result of this SOA Blue Ribbon Commission and some other recommendations. The biggest concern is this investment defeasance cost, so that we'll have to potentially disclose in our valuation reports. And basically, it's a termination liability of the plan. So you have to value it at a market rate, which is kind of hard to do because there is no market for your pension benefits. No one's going to buy them from you. So, but it's basically just the cost of closing the plan down on a particular date. So what it's going to do is, first of all, it's going to be a big number because we're going to be using some sort of market discount rate, and it's going to create confusion. So then you're going to have to be defending, like, well, what's the real number, type of deal. And I'll be able to look right in the report and go, oh, there's two numbers, which is it, So it could be a problem, but the one way I look at it is that, hey, this is actually the savings that you're having. This is what it would cost if you don't, if you didn't invest. That difference is the savings to the plan. So
Make sure you keep writing that.
yeah. So
Insane for years.
So
We
that-
just have never had a number to back it up.
That's the cost to stop all contributions.
yes, to buy out like this, to buy, lump sums essentially to pay
To
everybody
pay every,
out. Yes.
every benefit for everyone's
Yes.
lives that we're contractually obligated to do.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's actually a good number to know for us.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, no, it can be good. I mean, it can be good. It's just that what we don't like about it is just having different numbers that people can just use whatever motivation they have and picking it, essentially.
But
So
you're not really giving us the actual numbers. You're playing games with numbers.
that's
and
right.
everything.
That's right. So yeah, you hear that all the time. So and then just to finish up on these ASOP changes, there's some other things. If the amortization methodology is picked by the actuary and it's has negative amortization and open amortization periods, we would not be able to recommend that if we're picking it.
What is that?
So right now, if you guys use level percentage of pay, so at 30 years, for instance, you're not really paying off, you're not paying enough to even make the interest on the unfunded liability. So your unfunded actually will grow for several years until the benefit, until the contribution, because it's going to grow by 3.25% every year based on the assumption, until that gets big enough to start tackling the principal and interest. So it used to be prior to.
So that doesn't take any investment income into account, is that what you're saying?
No, it does not.
Okay.
It does not.
Makes
It
sense.
does not. And in theory, you shouldn't be, because we assume that you're only going to earn what we think you're going to earn. So there should be no, over the long term, no extra investment income, essentially. So, yeah, so that's something we can't, if it comes down to an actual recommendation, we wouldn't be able to make it, essentially. I'm not sure how it's going to play out with places like here where your contributions are fixed and we're solving for it. So like, there's really no calculation of an ARC per se, or actual determined contribution. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The other thing too is that, especially with the discount rates, using the 7.5%, we're going to have to be able to justify that every valuation. So that can be hard depending on the materials out there, economic assumptions that are out there, in order to, right now we're fine, but we can no longer say, hey, we're going to be doing an experience study in 3 years and we'll examine it then. That won't be, we won't be able to do that. So, and that really was just come into play with dueling actuaries, with actual audits and those types of things. So finally, we get to this ASOP 51. It defines risk as a potential of actual future measurement deviations from the expected. So we make a lot of assumptions for these projects or for doing valuations. So anytime reality deviates from the assumption, well, that's a risk, essentially, and, you know, how much does it deviate and those types of things. The next slide describes or defines some of the risks, but it's not limited to this. We can make up anything that we perceive as a risk and test it. But obviously the biggest two are investment risk and longevity risk. So mortality improvements and then the volatility in the investments. So if you do invest in risky portfolios that have standard deviations, you know, over 12%. So that means that you're expecting a wide range of possibilities. So, and where that can play a role is plans like this where we have negative cash flows. So that means the contributions going in minus just the benefit payments is negative, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's the reason why you accumulate the assets. There's a build-up phase and a payout phase, and in the end, you would expect zero assets. It's just that when you have volatile assets, the order of these returns can actually create a difference. And once I get through this, there's one slide I'll show you, and it's kind of interesting. The next slide we talk about, it talks about ways to test it. So there's scenario testing, sensitivity testing, stochastic modeling, which is randomization, basically. Stress testing, maybe, you know, picking out a particular scenario that you think is like maybe a doomsday for you, or, you know, and you want to see what the outcome. You really don't want to pick. You want to pick outcomes that are likely, because otherwise, you know, for instance, some of these slides in here are examples of what we did for another client, and we did, well, what happens if we have a repeat of the Great Recession? And obviously, that's not a good looking result. So, and you're really not funding for that. Nobody is funding pension plans assuming you might earn a minus 20% one year. So if you were, you would be really risk averse and having to make much higher contributions, essentially. Here's some of the things we actually put in the report this year. This investment risk or asset volatility ratio is basically a ratio of the market value of assets divided by the payroll for the plan for the year, and yours is 4.92 on this valuation. What that means is if you lose 1% of your assets, to make that up in one single year, you have to put 4.92% of your payroll. That would be the amount of the contribution that would be required.
Any idea how this compares to peers similar size?
It's in the ballpark. And I'd point out here too that the more assets you had, so if say you were 100% funded, which you would have a lot bigger assets, this ratio would be even bigger. So so that's just, you know, payroll has been growing, but it doesn't grow as fast as the assets typically. So that's just something to consider. You can also use this to compare to another plan. Like what do you think, like the risk profile? So for instance, if another plan, the risk AVR ratio was 4, you would have a slightly higher risk of like 4.92 divided by 4. Essentially, that would be the difference in what you would have to make up compared to that plan. So it allows you to kind of compare other plans just based on the value of your assets and the amount of the payroll that you're using to fund the plan.
Board of Investments consultant, RBK, does that regularly.
Okay.
And the time that I've been on the board, our risk value is generally less than our peers, but our return is generally greater than our peers. So,
Yeah, no,
so far they've been pretty good.
Yeah. So the next slide just shows negative cash flow. And so I was pointing out, so your negative cash flow has been trending up from 2.92% in 2015 up to 3.69%. This is a very manageable number. So, but you do want to keep an eye on this, and this is one of the things that we'll look at and when we do this study is like, well, what is it going to be 15 years from now, 20 years from now? Are we expecting it to grow? Does it hit a point and kind of just stops and stays there? But the negative cash flow does have an impact on the order of the returns. So you can, and the slide will show it when we get to it. Finally, there's plan maturity measures, and two of them, the most obvious ones are the ratio of retiree liability to the total accrued liability. So it's here we're about 70% retiree liability compared to the active. So what that tells you is that that touching actives doesn't really do anything in terms of trying to come up with a plan pension reform or something like that. So that tells you on that. So you have a mature plan. And then finally, the ratio of actives to retirees is 1.21%. That's another example. So the next slides basically just go over, they're not specific to your plan, but they just some examples of things that we would provide. I would basically, on some of the scenario testing, get together as a board and figure out, what are your doomsday scenarios, and do we want to see what kind of impact that would have on the plan, and then do we need to come up with a playbook maybe, to address that scenario? So that's kind of where this stuff can kind of come in handy. So you can identify certain weaknesses and then come up with a strategy if you see that you're heading in that direction. Or what do we do? Because oftentimes the delay in doing something can cost more than the fix, by waiting for several years before it gets fixed. But just turn to slide, just to show on slide, I think it was 41 yesterday. Slide 43. I think this is very interesting just from a pure mathematical point of view. So we took this plan and just did a deterministic projection, which means that we earned 17.5% for 4 years, then minus 2.5% for 4 years, and then earn 7.5% going forward. And the red line just shows the reverse of those two, the minus 2.5 versus the 17.5. And when you get out to the end, there's about $4 billion difference in the value of the assets. So just mathematically, and that's driven by the negative cash flow element, that's minus 3% that you're spending out. So because once it's spent, it's not there to recover, essentially. So that's why where you start and the order of the returns is kind of helps tell either a rosy story or a difficult story. So, but these are some of the things that we would look at, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about different scenarios or whatever. But really, so that's it for our presentation.
So a couple things, I guess, on the risk analysis, just so everyone, both at the table and in the audience, is clear. Nothing after page 31 reflects TRS as a plan. These are just exhibits from other plans and how it trends. But another thing is we have the legislature has a pension work group as part of the LFD. They got a subcommittee that wants to look at the long-term cost of pensions in conjunction with other long-term liabilities of the state, as well as revenue pieces of it. But it's House Bill 533, and part of what they're looking for is a liability or risk analysis, a liability study or risk analysis similar to what Todd has laid out here. And in fact, I put it as an action item for the board to authorize, them actually running the analysis for Montana and putting together a report. It would answer pretty much all of the questions I think the legislative committee has, and it would be conducted by our actuary that has our real data rather than us saying, well, technically we met the ASOP 51 requirement at page 31 through 35 of our report, because I think we actually have.
You have, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we met the requirement, which is those couple of pages. I think, if you remember, I had sent out a link in the previous meeting to, I think it was Ohio or Iowa, their risk analysis report. And so Kavanaugh McDonald's been doing this for a few of their clients. They have a pretty good template. I think the scenarios they ran in those reports are, as reasonable as anything when you're looking at, a little bit better than what you expect or a little bit worse than what you expect. What does it do down the road? I think that's probably the most value to us, rather than minus 20 for 4 years, and how are things going to look? Not very good. Or 0% for 10 years. How does it look? So I guess with that, I just wanted to let the board know we're at a point. They're hoping to have some information in, I think, the February timeframe. If we were to authorize Kavanaugh McDonald to move ahead with the risk analysis, it would probably be late January by the time they would have it ready if we authorize them at this meeting. So we don't have a lot of extra time to talk about, unless you want to talk about them today, and that's why I scheduled a little extra time about what scenarios you'd like to see, or if we want to go more in line with the template they already have.
So this is not for our plan?
No.
Okay. Can I ask a question about page 39 first? Just an observation and see if I don't know what I'm saying. So, clearly the percentages are the funded ratios.
Right.
And so if I were to look at this and say 6.25% as a return, that's kind of the break even to keep your funded ratio over the next.
So what's...
Is that accurate? Kind of?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so this plan is very similar to your plan to the extent that the contributions are set in statute, so they don't change. So that's why when you assume less investment income, that's why the funded ratio drops. So at 5, it's going from 6, because the contributions aren't going to change. It's just what the expected return.
And so for this example, 6.25 is about the break even.
That's correct. That's correct. So I'm not sure what it would be for your plan, but yeah.
Kevin, I have a question about that. It seems one of the weaknesses in our ability to make adjustments to the plan is the fact that Board of Investments has got blanket demographics for all of the pension plans, and we don't have any direct control over how they adjust those investment assets to make it specific to the needs of teachers' retirement. How much of a weakness do you see that being in our ability to move forward with our capacity to make adjustments in the assumptions?
Well, you just don't have control over that element of the plan. So that could be perceived as a weakness. But I do think that they're probably taking into account the cash flow, short-term cash flow needs, which is really that's their job, is trying to juggle like your short-term liquidity requirements to pay the benefits, but then also maximize the amount of return in the future without going to Vegas, let's say, essentially. So that could be perceived as a weakness because this particular board doesn't have that authority, but in a lot of ways it's probably better for you because as a fiduciary, because you're not making those decisions. I think that's where like in Kentucky, there's some of the board members were getting sued because of an investment into a hedge fund that went belly up. So unfortunately, we were part of that too. It's been dismissed so far. It keeps getting, now it's at the Kentucky Supreme Court. But essentially, that board made investment decisions, and so when something didn't work out, now they started suing members of that board. So I think from a fiduciary standpoint, I think it actually benefits you to have another agency and control that, and that's their responsibility. And but it can be a weakness if you feel like in the short term you might think you could do a better job.
Well, it's not so much that, it's just that the different pension plans have different levels of funding, different total demographics on all these issues.
Well, we send, every year, we provide an update, like of a short-term projection of the benefit payments and contributions.
Mhm.
So they do know,
Yeah.
you know, they do have real information that they're working with.
I understand. Still, they have to have a generic investment strategy that is supposed to accommodate all of those different pension plans with all
Yeah.
those different challenges, so that's a bit of a,
But they actually do take the net cash need for each of those into account, making those investment decisions so that they make sure they have cash available.
yeah,
They aren't forced to sell something that's not very liquid.
right.
you know.
So in the short term, that they accommodate our cash flow need.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is, TRS and PRS are obviously the two largest systems, and we're very similar as far as funded ratio and as well as cash need. I mean, they're very close. So
Okay.
I would say that if anything, their allocation strategy is built more around TRS and PERS than it is the other, smaller systems.
Good to know.
So, yeah.
You know, the real weakness is that it takes legislative action to change rates of contributions.
Right.
And so one of the least funded components of the PERS system, they've been trying to increase the funding there for quite a number of years, and that keeps getting shot down.
Hmm.
So that's the biggest weakness we face,
Mhm.
I think.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and so for the PERS system, their benefit payment requirement's about 400 million, and yours is right there, pretty close to it, so.
I kind of feel like, Sean, you know what they want. You know kind of what they're looking for, right?
They're looking for that, aren't they?
The Board of Investments.
Yeah. No, not
No.
the Board of Investments, the
Oh,
plan
the
that
committee.
we're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah, I think so. I think all of these various scenarios that are laid out in here are things that, those are the kinds of things that they're looking for is, order of return, the magnitude of how your assets change over time versus, sort of slow return in the beginning and then higher returns in the end versus higher returns in the beginning, lower returns in the end. Those are all things that I think they're interested in seeing, as well as I think that the board would be interested to see as well. No one has a crystal ball, right? You don't know for sure one way or the other in the next 5 years what exactly we're going to average. I think overall our inception to date numbers were real close to it's still slightly above our long-term rate of return assumptions. So.
Well, I take a little bit of additional comfort in the fact that, as Jeff mentioned, in recent years at least, the standard deviation through the Board of Investments is lower than might have been expected, and the return is a little bit higher. And I credit that to the fact that when you run a graph showing long-term investment results, those are just theoretical averages. Here we actually have human beings that are supposed to be observing the outside world and taking the ship and making minor adjustments so that we can do exactly that long-term.
Absolutely, that's the goal, right? To least risk, highest return with that, I forget the name of that shape of that curve.
All right.
So, one of the parts of the slide talking about plausible, how plausible these things are. Yeah, the minus
Right.
20%, all that business. How plausible do you think, really? 17.5% for 4 years. And
Well, that was
minus
just to
2.5%.
average. Well, see, what's interesting about that though is you're averaging the same. The returns are the same. It doesn't matter that it could be anything.
Right, and the purpose here was just to show the opposite effect it would have.
That's right. So you reduce that deviation, and then you're going to get a smaller difference at the end, essentially. But the idea is to say, well, we've gotten the same returns, so you would think you'd be at the same place, right? But that's not true.
Well, the point is there is a bad start in any long-term strategy is hard to recover from. So if you start with $90 and you lose a third, you're down to 60, and to get back to 90, you've got to gain 50%.
That's correct. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, and just to point out, that if you could turn to slide 46, we have, you have the 2009 without recovery. You can see that they eventually, the funded ratio drops to nearly 20% in this projection, but you can see that with the recovery, they actually kind of stay they hold serve essentially. So, I mean, that's not ideal, but it's not, you know, if you have a repeat of the 2008 with the recovery, it doesn't sink it, you know, so. And we've never had a period where you've had a sudden decrease and not have a recovery after of some sort come. And that only makes sense because after you have a deep drop in the market, things become cheap and investors want to jump in and buy them again. So, you know.
I think having the numbers on that specific test would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Any public comment?
Sure. I like the idea of having this board do actuarial studies get what they need rather than having an outside actuary come in, someone who knows the plan, and then setting parameters that are reasonable and realistic might happen. I think would also be helpful. But I look forward to that if you approve it.
Sherry Scurr, Legislative Services. I have some questions, but I don't know if it's better just to talk to the actuaries after your meeting or.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Certainly just.
Okay, because I really appreciated their time yesterday, and so these are questions that are referring to today.
You just need to stop looking at that, man.
I know. Put it down. Stop. You talked about this change in the GABA assumption and the
Correct.
the 1.5, and then you talked about the tier 2 were coming in. You know, how they were coming in was making a difference, and I wonder what you meant by how. Are they coming in not as many?
No, it's not the many, it's just they're older.
They're older.
Yeah, so they have, like when we did those initial cost studies, we based it on the current demographics of the plan. But what's happening is we're starting to see average higher ages increase over time.
They're older than expected.
Yeah, like people aren't getting, you're not getting brand new 20-year-old, 21 or 22-year-old teachers. It's like they're more like 35. You know, maybe a second career choice.
Yeah.
Something like that. So.
Okay, thanks. And then on the negative cash flow, you said it's a manageable number.
Yes.
But keep an eye on it. What would be the tipping point where you would, what number, or do you know?
If you get to 7, 8, 9%, I mean, we see plans that have minus 10% cash flow.
And so then you talked about doing a longer term look at that. Would that be in your actuarial evaluation or in a special study?
That'll be in the special study. Because that requires projections, so it's not like evaluation, which is a snapshot. So that requires like real projections, so it would be in the special study that we would perform.
That you're going to be doing
Yeah.
on that risk analysis? Okay. Let's see. Probabilities. So I love Mr. Greenfield, I'm sorry, question about probabilities. In the risk study, is there risk analysis and ASOP 51 and whatever all is going to go into your decision on how you do that? Is there going to be, are we just running scenarios or?
No. There's going to be a stochastic analysis as well. So that's probabilities. Yeah. So we'll, what's your median 50th percentile probability of achieving, what's your funded ratio going to look like, going forward based on different outcomes, based on how the fund is invested.
Okay, do I understand? Okay, so the scenarios being picked, will they be just
well, so those
random or?
Those will be deterministic scenarios. So, and a scenario is really trying to figure out like what is an outcome. Like for instance, a repeat of 2008 with a recovery and 2008 without a recovery. That's a scenario. It can be anything.
Oh, but there
So
is.
that's an interesting thing to look at, right? A stochastic analysis does, basically we do 1,000 or more 30-year projections based on different investment returns.
But randomly.
And then compiling those results using a ranking system. So ideally, you want your 50th percentile to kind of have a result, right? If it's your, and so if you see that your 50th percentile might not be such a positive result, that might show a weakness in the plan that might need to be watched out for. Maybe developing like a playbook, like I had said earlier. What happens? Certain things happen. How do we attack the problem instead of just waiting for something to happen?
So am I tracking this right? Because I'm sorry that I sometimes don't intersect these correctly. So for example, if RVK says there's a 50% chance that with this investment portfolio, you're only going to get a 6% return. Is that what you're talking about?
No. It's similar to that, but it's not the same thing. It may be that with those capital market assumptions, that would influence a result of having only achieved 6%. But we would probably want to use a couple of different assumptions just to show that here's pessimistic assumptions, here's optimistic, and here's kind of in the middle type of thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's been our experience that RBK is pretty pessimistic, like all the time. So.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to make the connection.
Well, if it's up to RBK, I think you would never earn 7.5. You'd only earn 6, but every year you beat it. So it's. Yeah.
Okay.
Shorter term, shorter duration, very manageable.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
So, and Sherry, just so you know, there are a couple slides on that in the back of this, on pages, I think, it starts on 47 through 51. And those are examples, obviously, that's not our plan, but those are some things that we may have run as part of our risk analysis. And then if I could real quick, the point on the GABA for tier 2 versus tier 1 and the normal cost not really being as much of a change as what you may have thought initially. It's because if they come in older, they're essentially the exact same as our tier 1 members, right? They're not gonna work for 30. Their multiplier is the exact same as tier 1. And for now, their contribution rates are exactly the same as tier 1. So that's why if we don't adjust that GABA down to 0.5, which is what's really going to be for the next 20 years, we don't recognize any gain from having the tier 2 membership, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
Well, plus I think it takes actually action from you guys to make it change. So with the other system, it's automatic what the what their GABA is for the tier 3 people. It's based on the funded ratio. So it's a little different there. So the board doesn't take any action. It's just if the funded ratio is 82%, it's this GABA. If it's 84, it's another. It's based on being less than 90% funded.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
One more question.
You bet.
So on the slide of the actual gain and loss, there was a small bar for the methods change, and then the bigger bar for the other.
The data change. Yeah.
Oh, the data change. So which is that? What the GABA was? The data change?
No. The data change was there were some people in the data who were basically beneficiaries who are waiting to receive a lump sum of the members' contributions because they passed away. And so when we were valuing those people, we were valuing them as life annuities and not lump sums. And so they could have a $40,000 lump sum, and instead of just valuing that with $40,000 in liability to offset that, instead we were treating it as an annuity, so $40,000 a year. Like, so it's a significant reduction. Like there was some people that test cases I looked at, they had like $2 million liability that should have been $40,000.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, we overestimated.
And then the method change was?
The method change was just to reduce the assumed GABA from 1.5% to the 0.5%. And that was small, $6 million.
Okay.
Yes, that was tiny.
Thank you.
Okay.
The board members have any other questions? Todd and Joe?
Not so much a question.
cost. So one thing I haven't got out of you yet is how much that's going to cost.
There would be a good one.
3 million?
We don't want it.
17.4 billion.
Well, we gotta do an analysis. The comment is, I'm not overly surprised that our demographics are a little different with our tier 2 people, because I do think in Montana in particular, on the eastern half of the state, it's extremely difficult to find teachers, and we see a lot of new teachers that are actually coming from other careers within their communities to be a part of the school district and do some other stuff. So that part doesn't surprise me, and maybe we need to incorporate that somehow into what we do with our demographic stuff, because I don't see that changing with what's happening in that part of the state. And then the other part is, even though I know that the action item doesn't have dollars attached to it, I would love to see us, when we approve your report with your ASOP 51 risk analysis in it, just telling people we've already done this. And then when we look at additional stuff to review, we don't talk about it in regard to ASOP 51, because I don't want to see those have to become part of our analysis every single year just because we did it this first time.
No, I think that's a great point, and I don't know that we would even want to have it done every single year.
Well,
I think what's in the report actually complies with the standard. This is additional analysis that, is as much in response to into the legislative study as anything for this year.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to talk to it in that vein as opposed to additional 51.
Okay.
Are we today supposed to tell you guys which of these studies we want to see, or is it a package? How does it work?
Well, we've already have given Sean a template report that we've built for our clients. So as of right now, I think we would just do those same studies. If you have something in mind that you're interested in seeing, we can obviously modify it to include that. So.
And I assume these are
Yeah, it would be real similar to that, the Iowa and the Ohio reports. Yep.
Any other comments, questions, concerns? Thank you guys so much for coming
you.
today, and we'll see you in Tennessee.
See you Saturday.
Is there any further public comment? I would like to get that, make sure we aren't missing out. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much for your questions and comments. We need an action item to adopt this valuation.
I move that we adopt this evaluation from our consultants, which does include the ASOP 51 analysis.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further comments? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Any opposed? And so let's talk about the action item then to authorize the additional ASOP 51 risk analysis and talk about what we might want to see.
And maybe what we should just call it additional risk analysis and not call it ASOP 51 at all, just additional risk analysis.
Okay.
I would actually make a motion to do the analysis as discussed. That is based on the template that Sean's already been working on.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further comments on that? Questions, concerns? All those in favor then indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Any opposed? All right. So I think we have a clear plan as to what we want to see, and thank you so much again. Great. We have a break built in right now. Should we just take a break for 10 minutes? Come back at 9:50? Meeting back to order, and you're right. We thought we'd have a little bit of time, but we talked a little longer than we did.
Well, thank you, everybody. I what we want to do today with me here is go over the draft strategic plan. I think it's in everyone's packets, is that right?
Yep, behind tab 4.
Okay, so we'll look at that. And so just kind of what we did up to now is, as you recall, we did the strategic planning session earlier this summer. And then I drafted the strategic plan, and subsequent to that met with the leadership team. We kind of went through it in detail and really tried to firm some things up. And also the other thing we tried to do was pare things down a little bit and simplify or streamline things a little. And the other thing I want to just give the board a heads up is, in the past, and it's our intent this time, is to post the plan on the website. So in addition to making sure it clearly reflects what our goals and objectives are for the coming biennium and beyond, some of the goals and objectives stretch beyond that. We want to make sure the document is accurately portraying what we want to portray to external audiences. So that may be something when we go through the SWOT analysis, if there's something in there that could be better stated or problematic the way it's currently stated. We just want to make sure this is for a lot of audiences. We kind of have an internal planning document. The leadership team was very astute in tracking some of the things we talked about during the strategic planning meeting that will be more part of internal work plans and not necessarily something we put out there for external consumption. So with that, I don't know if any board members had any overall or overarching comments or questions. I want to give people a chance to do that, and then if not, we'll just maybe jump into the plan and kind of go through it and make sure everybody's okay with what we've got presented. And then once we get to the point where you're happy with what the plan looks like, I'll make any final edits, revisions. We'll get it up on the website. And then I will work with Sean and the staff to kind of translate some of the strategic objectives into performance objectives for staff. If you're not sick of me yet, we're going to be rolling right into the executive director performance appraisal process here pretty soon. We're coming up on that time where we do the surveys of board and staff and everything. And the timing will be great because we'll close out last year's appraisal, and then I'll work with Sean to see kind of what aspects of this plan need to show up in his appraisal, and he'll work with staff to kind of get the appropriate thing embedded in their performance goals for the coming year.
I just have a comment. I mean, when I went through it, I was impressed with how concise you made all of our discussion. I mean, I know we go off task and off track, and so I just really appreciated how it came together.
Good, thank you. Yeah, and I have a lot of help again from the leadership team, kind of wrangling some of that in and kind of paring it down a little bit. So really, page 3 and 4 are just kind of the summary of what we did and the background for anybody that kind of wasn't familiar with the process. And this really is a decade-long process. It's been very effective. It's just been a pleasure with TRS because you guys set objectives up and then you achieve them and check them off and move on to the next. So it's really kind of neat to do strategic planning with an organization that gets the objectives done. So really on page 5, I think, is probably the first area we want to start looking at some areas. We just made some very minor enhancements, I guess, to the mission and vision. The additional language is in red there. So those are pretty, not big changes, but they're pretty important statements. So I just want to make sure the board agrees and is happy with the language changes to the mission and vision.
I just have a question, Jim, about the first one. The language there, just based on our earlier discussion about our limited capacity to actually directly impact the Board of Investments.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that the board is saying that we intend by that comment?
The maintaining the stability of the fund, or?
Proactively maintaining the stability of the fund.
What I understand, and I'll let any board members jump in, but it was trying to convey the fact that there's a commitment both on the part of the board and staff to remain abreast of issues, attend conferences, be aware of what's going on the national and state levels, and kind of the proactively really ties into or supports some of our objectives for, sending board members to conferences, doing continuing education for staff, that type of thing. Now, that's my interpretation. I don't know if any board members or Sean have any other thoughts.
I also view it as our ability and expectation to bring things to the legislature, whether it's clean up language, specify whatever, or ask for more funding in certain instances where they just need to fund us more. So that's how I view it.
Should end with the plan and not the fund?
Yeah. Might be a good-
Because that seems more specific to the actual investments
That's
versus
very
what we're,
true.
what we're really
Yeah.
all about here.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not.
So is everyone okay with that, changing fund to plan?
Yeah, they're essentially one and the same. I think the addition of the word proactively did tie back to the what Jim pointed out from our planning session in August, was that we need to, as fiduciaries, show that we're doing our part, which includes some external training and external conferences and things for both staff and the board.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think the plan is fine.
The system, if you want to be more.
Because the fund does make it sound like it's just the investment piece
Mhm.
more.
Right.
I agree.
Plan or system, I agree would be probably better.
Which do we like, plan or system?
Well, we're in the teacher retirement system, so system
That's
is
just
probably.
stuff, yeah.
Okay. And just by way of a style or question, I'll throw this out to everybody, and even Darla, I'm curious for your input. I mean, the little descriptor I have below there, is that something we want to include in the formal publication, or do we want to get rid of that? Do we care?
I would get rid of it.
Okay.
Darla, do you agree?
Okay. Very good.
I think it helped us to understand and remember what we talked about, but I don't think
Right.
it needs to be, I think our mission and vision just stand alone.
Right.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. Okay, and then the same with the vision. We, originally said effective and empowered staff, and we changed it to board and staff because, again, we want to, our vision is, again, to keep the board being well-versed in the issues and continue that efforts at those levels. So we really just added kind of board there, and then added a little bit about what it is we want to be well-versed in.
I think it makes more sense if you flip those two words out.
That's exactly what I was,
It should be empowered board and professional staff.
or empowered professional staff and board.
Something.
Okay.
It just seems a little
Yeah.
awkward.
You don't feel professional?
Professional board.
I'm just
Right,
teasing.
yeah,
Been here for a long time, and that's one thing I really do.
Me either.
That we're also eliminating the stuff in parentheses, right?
Yep. Okay, so it'll read, employing an effective and empowered professional staff and board well-versed in state and national issues. Yep, okay. And we'll ditch the parentheses below there. Okay, our guiding principles, we all felt were still appropriate, so those didn't change. We'll jump into the operational environmental assessment. Same thing, the significant addition or changes are indicated in red font, just for our review today, and I think once we get through that, I'll just turn it all black and it'll just be a final document there. So like I said at the outset, if there's anything you see in here, I don't know, when we're putting things out for public consumption, sometimes less is better. I mean, if there's anything you see in here that is either redundant or kind of issues that aren't really necessarily on the horizon now, the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats have kind of evolved, and certainly a lot of the strengths, like the staffing, I mean, that's just, as long as we keep up our efforts with training and pay and retention, everything, that's always going to be a strength. And so I don't know if there's anything we see on there that we could consolidate or get rid of. And then at the bottom there are some of the new things we added. with our recent assessment.
Should they be grouped more by like staffing, grouped more by category
I can do that.
type thing?
Okay, yeah, I can just go through and kind of put each one into a general category.
I mean, you don't need to label those categories,
Right.
but if you're talking about staffing, you start with staffing and then you end with staffing,
Right, just putting up all the staffing, kind of the,
right, training and everything for that. in
Okay.
one-
yeah, that's no problem, I'll take a stab at that.
Sounds like an English teacher.
Hey, someplace in this board packet, there's a pronoun antecedent agreement mistake, and I can't remember where.
But I think there's some general themes here. I mean, there's kind of our staffing, our training, kind of our internal resources, then there's some of our leadership and our systems and our external partners. So I'll just go through and kind of sort them all, throw them in a spreadsheet, sort them all that way.
Speaking of staffing, that last sentence, I would rather see us say something like, or we increase staff as needed in this thing. It makes it sound like, well, we just can't get it all done, so we're gonna start adding staff.
Right.
It'd be nice to know in there that
We have
discussion
done
of
that.
need and projects and whatever were the reasons why our staff continues to grow.
Okay.
Something in that.
Like, staffing is increased to develop our capacity and ability to provide service.
Yeah, so maybe it could be, yeah, something like that, just keying off of what Dan said, and just maybe, you know, the system's ability or our ability to increase our staffing as needed to, you know, improve or meet our capacity and ability to provide service.
Yeah, as a strength.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
And I mean, there's a couple elements to that. I mean, you've got the financial resources to do it and now the physical space to do it. If you want to increase your staff, you really could, unless
Yeah.
somebody is going to say that's.
It just struck me wrong that our strength is the fact that we can increase our staff. That didn't quite.
Right, I think, well, yeah, I think the way I read that is because we increased our staff over the last several years, it's strength versus.
I think that's the way all of us feel, but.
Right. But yeah, no, I think the change sounds good.
Okay, very good. How about the weaknesses? Any comments or thoughts there?
On the first new red bullet, there is no direct contact unless they want to contact TRS. Instead of that, you.
Okay.
Actually, I'd like to
Unless
change
members
that thought a
want.
little bit. I don't think it's a great idea for us as a system to say we do not have direct contact with our members. I think we have several outreach opportunities that happen, and that's not taken into account there.
I think we could get rid of that whole second sentence.
I
really.
would agree.
Yeah.
Second and third.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll just say we can't control whether members engage and take advantage of opportunities.
Yeah.
Leave it at that. Very good.
So a very minor point, but any chance we could change weaknesses to challenges? Just as a general concept?
I think that sounds.
It's a SWOT analysis.
He's Scott.
It could
You
be
can do a SWOT.
analysis. Might be a SWOT analysis.
When it says we can't control whether members, it's true, we can't. It sounds It might sound a little better just to say members may not engage in or take advantage of opportunities to educate themselves about the system. Kind of takes us out of the mix.
Yeah.
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 It seems like we want to control our members when we say it that way. We don't really want to control them.
Exactly, I like that.
We do.
That's speaking for yours, yeah.
And I'm okay with challenges. I mean, we call it an operational assessment. I don't even know if I specifically refer to it as a SWOT, so it can certainly be a SCOT. I don't know if that's- We've already got a SCOT.
That's right. You know, if we're gonna do a Scott
We
analysis,
need
we're
a
gonna
tea.
have to talk about some other things.
The beer and
That's probably true. There goes the afternoon.
Yeah, we don't want this to extend any longer than that.
Remember, I have to feed football players.
Okay. All right, so we'll go with challenges. We'll change that whole thing about members may not engage and take advantage of opportunities to educate themselves about the systems, period. Leave it at that. Everything else look okay there? Okay. Opportunities on page 8, we can look at those.
Challenges implies that we're being proactive about our weaknesses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it.
Good connection.
I thought the opportunities
Yeah, they're pretty.
were realistic.
We need, as you were saying, to be more concise, that we haven't had to mobilize them recently. That may be true, but
Don't know that we need to say that.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take it out.
That second sentence on that same bullet point is not actually a sentence.
True.
well, in the beginning, a large consistency, but is it parallel all the way down with fragments?
So a large
Yeah,
consistency.
the verb is implied. Is a large, but it is being overworked.
Yeah.
So it's a fragment that's actually acceptable in modern day writing.
Never acceptable. English teacher.
I was looking for the parallel structure and the way it was set up.
There's more opportunities on the backside.
Okay, any thoughts on the communication opportunities on page 9? I do see a period inside the parentheses. This should probably be outside the parentheses there. I'll put that. Okay. Great.
I think Sean should do a podcast.
A podcast?
Every week. I'm sure a lot of people will listen.
I'm hitting the road here starting in November.
Got guitars?
Yeah. I do.
Those two words.
Mass superintendents. Yep.
All right, let's look at the threats.
So I guess the only thing I would say, I don't know if we need that first red sentence, because every time we do evaluation, we assume the membership's gonna be flat on purpose, for the purposes of doing the vow. And in fact, it's actually growing slightly.
Yeah, there was a slight growth on that last,
Yeah.
on that
Oh,
report.
great.
So I don't, the ratio continues to grow. Is it a threat? I don't know.
Not in a mature plan,
Right,
based on
that's what.
what you're
Just,
saying.
just depends on how big that
Well,
ratio is.
It does, yeah.
Okay. Everybody okay with just getting rid of that sentence there? Active membership, staying
I
flat?
think if we
Okay.
were to add anything else, it might be something that new members are not as traditional as they used to be. The members are, I don't know how you'd say it.
Increased age of new teachers or something.
Other changes may include increased age. Yeah.
In the second red sentence, after areas, that period shouldn't be there. That's a continuation on that sentence. And should we will continue to put pressure on TRS, to be pressure.
Oh, okay.
And there shouldn't be a comma after shortages, teacher shortage.
Right, exactly.
So do we, just jumping back to the demographics, do we want to add something about the fact that, new members are maybe older, or do we, other changes to demographics?
It can vary so much, I mean. it's-
Yeah.
I don't think we need to be specific.
Maybe
Okay.
maybe just something like we continue to look at changes in demographics or something. I don't think you need to put anything in there.
You could just say shifting demographics as the threat.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true, and then they cover kind of all the bases.
Yeah.
Yep.
Got it. Very good. Okay.
They can shift one way 1 year,
Yep.
3 years later,
Absolutely.
they shift
Yeah.
the other way. Yep.
The failure to reduce unfunded liability, technically there was a slight decrease.
There was, right, from last year to this year, yes.
So,
I don't think it was very significant.
no, but, yeah,
Well,
it's still.
but-
Still a threat.
But if
Right.
Yeah.
but if we do fail, it's a real threat.
Right,
Yeah.
true. Yeah, and somehow a point something decreases.
Right, I mean, it's just, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what happened or what we're,
Maybe we should say,
It's
put a
just-
statement in there about what our current reality is or something. Or
Keep it simple.
Yeah,
yeah.
well, we literally have a comment on every one of our threats, except that one.
We do, pretty
Which
much.
maybe is a statement all in of itself.
on the next page,
Might be.
the political views, is that not just a restatement of the philosophical divide between supporters and detractors of the defined benefit?
No, I don't believe it.
You don't think it is?
I don't believe it is.
Okay.
I believe part of the philosophical divide is political,
Okay,
but it's not the whole thing. There are some
Okay.
people that just,
I was just gonna say, we like to talk, don't we? Put everything down, we gotta cover it all.
We, at least it looks
It's
like
already
we're
in
aware
the
of what we're,
document.
dealing
Right.
with. And these are the things, these are the issues we're dealing with. I like it.
So on the last letter, on the last red one there, it's kind of, the first one is a sentence and the second one is that could be just one sentence. It could say, and administrative rules which may create a gap in ensuring our plan complies with our statutes.
Okay. Get rid of it. Yeah.
Well, maybe those two aren't actually connected, but.
our statutes or state statutes?
or just statutes?
No, I think that means that the statutes that deal with our system. There's all kinds of statutes.
Yeah, I mean, part of the qualification process was to make sure that we actually do what we say we do, right?
Mhm.
Isn't that?
Yeah, but I would change that sentence to just say in ensuring our plan complies with applicable law. I mean, that's state and federal and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So IRS no longer does qualification letters ensuring our plan complies with applicable law?
No, which may create a gap, so the change in the sentence that.
Okay.
I like
Dan Chamberlain-
Denise's version, which is much more concise.
Yeah, that doesn't happen very
Letters
often.
of qualification.
That is not true.
There's a first for everything.
Happens all the time.
So I'm sorry, Denise, would you restate it?
So the sentence would be plan against statutes and administrative rules, comma, which may create a gap in ensuring our plan complies with applicable law.
Did we
Did you have that correct?
Did we agree last meeting to hire a third party to help us with that threat?
We agreed to
To look at-
discuss it, yeah,
discuss it,
and
yeah.
and potentially budget for it next year, yeah.
Okay, very good.
I don't like the letter of qualification letters. They're a way to,
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Letter, yeah.
Qualification letters.
Yeah.
yeah, no longer does
no longer
qualification
requires
letters.
or no, provides or something.
Yes, it's one of the other. It's either a letter of qualification or qualification letters.
And it actually should be IRS no longer does regular qualification reviews or letters would be fine.
See, now we're getting back to.
Sorry.
We're starting to add some words back.
They do still do qualification letters. They don't
Not
do them
regularly.
as a periodic review, correct?
Okay. So yeah.
Concise and accurate should be the same thing.
Okay, so we'll go through the goals. This we'll get to kind of, I think, Dan's question about the getting a third party and everything. We do have that kind of lined out on the worksheet. So the goals assessment, we looked at the 2017 goals, 2017 night goals, and basically the board determined they were appropriate. We kind of reformulated them a little bit. And really the reformulating more just has to kind of do with, I think, the objectives that go with them. So I just, on the bottom of page 11, just put a few highlights of the accomplishments that we made with regard to the previous plan. I don't know if there's anything else we want to make sure we highlight there, if the board thinks. I mean, I think this is just a real high level, you know, the workspace, the workflow improvement, communication messaging, the GASB's implemented, the outreach and public relations is clicking along great. So I just like to highlight some of the accomplishments. And then top of page 12, I just summarized some of the issues that you all considered and looked at in coming up with the organizational goals and objectives. So the regulatory issues and actuarial issues, the state legislation, the surveys that we did, the board kind of considered and digested all that, and then came up with the revised 1921 goals and objectives. So there'll be some redundancies between the goals and objectives on pages 12 and 13 with the worksheet we're going to go over in the back. And really the goals and objectives are kind of just the big picture, high level descriptions of what we're doing, and then we actually kind of get a little more into the details in the worksheet on the back pages. So I think we've pretty much talked about most of the objectives in number one, if everybody's okay with those
Yeah.
under our first goal. 2 is the high-performance work culture. And that talks about our leadership and management strategies and our organizational capacity. So some of the additions there was just to continue to maintain and enhance the information systems and work processes. That captures some of the work we plan on doing. Continue to develop organizational capacity through staffing, contracting, and partnership.
Jim, excuse me for interrupting. If you jump back up under number 2, the second red one needs a closed parenthesis. Oh, there is, okay, never mind. I was reading farther on, missed it, my fault.
Oh, no worries.
It's there after control.
Yeah, I was going all the way to the end of the sentence and it wasn't.
So those are all things that are pretty achievable, and things that I think we've got something specifically lined out on our worksheet to do. But we've got specific actions that address each one of those objectives lined out, so. And then goal number 3 is the communication and outreach. There's some parallel. We talk about improving internal resources and communication in number 2. That's kind of the internal work culture, the procedures, the desk manuals, and then we have efficient business processes through communication. And that's more the external, like employer desk manuals and those efforts there. So they kind of parallel each other. So if everybody's okay with the updated objectives for our 3 goals, we can move into the strategic planning commitment worksheet. And this is where we actually kind of lay out the details of what we're going to do with regard to achieving those goals and objectives we just went over.
And this is the piece that we'll continue to review every board meeting, over for the next couple of years as we bite these off.
So just to quickly walk through, we talked about the risk analysis report. That's something we're going to get going on in the spring of next year. So as you see, we just kind of outlined each goal objective, what the outcome is going to be, what the tentative priority or timeline is, and like Sean said, he'll be updating the board on those, who kind of the point person is, and then our estimation of what resources it's going to require. And again, without getting into too much detail, those details will be brought back to the board as far as exactly what the actuarial fees will be, or exactly what the legal fees will be on the tax qualification reviews for board approval. But we just wanted to at least get it on our radar that there's going to be some needs there. So I think these have all been worked through fairly well, or the leadership team did a pretty good job of kind of going through these and making sure the timelines are feasible and the appropriate point people are identified. And then this will be kind of the worksheet against which we provide the regular updates and where we're at and everything.
Do we need to put under resources required on the second one, the fact that if we get outside consultant, there will be money involved?
So, let's see, that's the tax qualification. So
Correct.
on the one right below that, so what that is by May, we'll be making a proposal.
Okay, and then it's in that second box, third box.
Right,
Okay,
yep.
I see.
Yeah, and then the very first one, based on the discussion today, we're going to go ahead and move forward with that risk analysis, and it'll be an expense for us this fiscal year.
Right.
One that's not.
That's what made me think about the next one being an expense.
Yeah. Which may or may not require a budget amendment depending on how tight we're running on our operating budget. It's not something we had budgeted for this year ahead of time.
Then we talked on the bottom there about the additional contracts for support. So again, I think the same thing, staff will bring back kind of a scope of work and estimate associated with that additional work. Moving on to page 16. There's a link, this is all kind of linked to the overall goal of the high performance work culture and service excellence. So the workflow analysis, I think that'll be a collaborative effort between staff and the contractor for that in both the process and system documentation. Takes us down to the middle of the page is where we address the building and kind of a ongoing discussion about that and not wanting to be in the property management business. Using that asset to the best. And the internal audit capacity, that's something that internal and external audit capacity. I think the TRS will move forward with a recommendation for an auditor, so getting a job description, classification, cost estimate. We're looking at 2021 maybe for that person onboarding. And then continue with the strategic planning. We'll kind of go with just keep going with our cycle there. That's been productive. And then the communication outreach, we did talk about, Sean, like he just said, is going to be hitting the road and be trying to engage board members, if it's in your area or locale, and getting involved in some of those meetings. So the board's actually one of the responsible parties tagged on that. And then really the remaining outreach and public relations, the management team and communication director are going to be working on those collaboratively, and I think the bottom one there talks more about some of those desk manuals for employers and everything. So Darla will be working with Nolan on that effort, and I think there may be some crossover overlap with your efforts with the consultant to do some internal workflow and documentation. Maybe I'd see those two efforts supporting each other. And I don't know, I think maybe even occurring around the same time. Yeah, they're both kind of in that 2021 time range. And like Sean said, he'll provide regular updates. Time frames may change. Things may be moved up, pushed back, and we'll just use this as kind of our reporting mechanism. And then as you can see clearly, some of these things are going to clearly translate to staff performance objectives and performance appraisals and everything. So we'll work with the staff and leadership to get those incorporated. So unless anybody has any other thoughts, I'll make these changes. I'll work with Sean to get it up on the website.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Is there any public comment, Diane? Do you have any questions?
No. Thank you so much for incorporating some of the ideas we have. And I look forward to working with you to further educate our members in particular. Thank you.
Great. It's just a discussion item, so we do not need to, or do we need to vote?
I don't know that we've really ever had to adopt our strategic plan. I think we can just take those updates and move forward with it. And like Jim said, we've been through this enough as a group. We know if priorities change midstream, and we know that something else has to come up or something needs to go down, that we can do that as we go. But yeah.
I like the fact that they're not numbered anymore.
Yeah, right. So I think I don't think we've ever actually adopted it, have we? No, so.
The board created it essentially,
Right.
so.
I guess the only question I'd have is, does it seem like every 2 years to do the deep dive, that's about appropriate? And then in the off year, it's a little bit less.
It's just a normal cycle in the
Yeah.
office too, so I think it's
Okay.
Okay. All right, well, like I said, I'll be in touch with you about the appraisal process and work that in, and we're coming up with great incentives for staff to do the survey, so
Okay.
keep coming up with those
I
incentives.
tell you what,
This,
those pecans.
Yeah.
Gift card to
That would
cotton
be-
candy or
that
whatever
would-
it's called.
Yeah, we'll give you a pecan roll if you get this done.
Great, okay, well, thank you all very much,
Thank
and
you.
look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. All your time and effort.
Oh, you bet, thank you.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Steve.
working with you guys.
So we'll move on to our investment report. Jeff?
Sean included TRS-specific numbers. This is a sheet I've given you a few different times. This is really all of the Board of Investments.
Mine's upside down.
Yeah. I'll come back and help you with that. Thank you. Whether you want to know these numbers or not, this is, again, just a snapshot. You can see this was the end of August. Again, one of the less positive production months, but comes and goes. You can see where there were negative returns, and again, that comes and goes by month. So far, we're still a positive return for the year annually, but equity's been a bit of an issue for a little while, but again, it's coming and going. The tariffs and those sorts of things continue to be a problem for everybody, but who knows? Bigger stories, I guess, with Board of Investments. I'm pretty sure in June I mentioned that the CIO had resigned. Joe Cullen gave a 2-week notice and apparently had another job. In the meantime, the director formed kind of an executive committee with himself and the heads of each of the divisions that oversee all the investments. And they, as a group, meet and discuss all of the things that the chief investment officer was dealing with, and it's turned out to be a very good, robust discussion of positions. They use a consensus model, so they all have to talk through whatever it is that they're doing and get to a consensus. So it's really brought more, I don't want to say buy-in, but more understanding of each of the other sides of all of those assets into play, and they feel it's been very productive. We're currently almost at the point where we will be hiring a national search firm for the next CIO. At this point, the concept through Director Villa is still to kind of keep this executive board, even with the CIO. We'll see where that goes, or if that is a positive or a negative in attracting a CIO. Another hiring issue, deputy director had retired in December. Because of changeovers, job duties have been shared for a while. We're currently at the point where we're taking the applications, and I think soon to interview. Is that right, Diane? Yeah. So real soon we'll be interviewing for deputy director of Board of Investments. I think those are, with the variability in the markets, those really are the bigger issues that we're dealing with. I think we've been moving in a positive direction. It's a good working environment. People are happy. That matters.
Doesn't matter.
It
Yeah,
does.
it really does matter. So I think all is moving in the right direction still at the Board of Investments.
Thank you.
Can I, real quick,
Yeah.
ask, but so did you guys set the asset allocation for the year at the meeting this week, or was it just proposed
It was
changes?
proposed,
Okay.
and so we'll vote on that in November, right?
Okay.
November.
Just out of curiosity, on that proposal, was there any significant change to international equity exposure?
Not particularly, no. The change, you might remember about a year ago, was Joe introduced this diversified strategy as a concept, and that by itself is going to go away, and they're going to fold into core fixed and non-core fixed. So it's a little bit of a change of what we're looking at. I could bring that to our next board meeting, but as for equity, no, there wasn't a significant change. The biggest change, I think, in the way they're going to look at these is they're going to set midpoints, and in this group, the executive committee, if you want to call it that, if there's any class that's above or below that midpoint, there needs to be a discussion of why. So justify why this is low, justify why it's above the midpoint. And I think, to me, that sounded like a much better process to actually explain why to everybody we want to do X instead of Y. We did find that through this analysis there was more cash than we thought there was, because there's cash in STIP, there's cash just in the cap funds for the retirement systems, because again, you want to have some liquidity so you can buy or sell when you want to, not when you have to. But it turned out that they were in far more of those pots that Joe was, I don't know, keeping more cash than we thought we really needed. So they're going to be reinvesting some of that and actually increase exposure to other things other than no interest. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, financial statements then, Lily.
Board. I was going to start with a little handout I gave everyone. This is just we haven't had a chance to meet since the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, 2019. So these are what you'll see in the fiscal year 19 CAFR once it's finalized and published. The audit should start here in the next month, and so then we should have that out to all the board members after that point. But I don't anticipate any further changes to these, so if board members have any questions, I think some of the highlights are obviously our fiduciary net position increased by about 72 million from June 30th, 2018 to June 30th, 2019. So obviously our net investment income was positive. It was we earned about 5.7% on the year, which is down from the previous year of 8.2%, but it's still a positive number, which is good. Does anyone have any particular questions on the financials as of June 30th, 2019? A lot of them, they're just trends that you're going to see continue, like the contributions are continuing to go up slightly because of growth in membership, and also just our, the House Bill 377 changes from 2014, and it's increasing by 0.1% each year until for the next, for 10 years. And then obviously our benefit payments continue to increase every year as more people retire. So the next page, or the last page in that is where our budget ended up for June 30th, 2019. And we did end up with a budget surplus of close to what we were projecting all year, right around $100,000. So we came in under budget, which is always good. Does anyone have any particular questions on how the budget ended up for fiscal year 19? So that brings us, I guess, to what's in your actual board packets. As of August 31st, as Member Greenfield mentioned, our returns are quite a bit lower for this current fiscal year that we're in. It's only been a couple months of the fiscal year. But yeah, we're definitely have a year-to-date, loss of 21 million as opposed to last year. We had an increase of 28 million. You can see there on the balance sheet, and then obviously the fund balance statement. And there's nothing else that really, jumps out at me. I mean, obviously, just most of that loss is just due to the lower returns, for this fiscal year as opposed to at this point in the previous fiscal year. So you can see the total revenue as of at this point last year was about 90 million, and this year just 41 million. So it's still positive, but it's not as robust. Exactly. Good word. So then, on page 40, and any questions as of on our financials as of August 31st for this fiscal year? For the M-Trust budget, we're still projecting, it's just pretty similar to the projection that you've seen over the last few years of 100,000. We should have a surplus in our M-Trust Phase 3 budget, which, we're getting really close to wrapping that project up, and then those, costs will be capitalized and amortized over basically whatever the state accounting tells. I think it's 4 to 5 years for software. Yeah, so.
Can I jump in just for a second? Since on the M-Trust project itself, just so that I've talked about this a few different times, and I want to make sure everyone is on the same page. So we will be wrapping up Phase 3 here in late October, early November. However, there are a couple of additional enhancements that we're going to want to do outside of the project, and we talked about this already. I just want to make sure that everybody understands. So we're going to be showing around $100,000 of surplus on Phase 3, but in May, most likely, we'll be bringing forward a budget amendment to get us through this fiscal year, expense-wise, for the contractor, because we'll continue to utilize the test lead, and she's going to actually be our test lead and project manager to do the remaining 3 enhancements that we want to do, which is implement the IRS limitations for both benefits and contributions. We want to implement online withdrawals, and we want to implement required minimum distribution notices, have the system actually generate and do those instead of right now it's a once a year or a couple time a year report we run, and it's all manual process. So there are at least 3 distinct, for lack of a better word, because they're not modules, but they're 3 sort of processes we want to build in that we're outside of the current project. So when you see us, we finish with $100,000 surplus, we'll probably chew into that somewhat, but it'll be a distinct budget amendment to get us through this year. And then when we look at our budget in May for the following year, we'll have it built in an amount. So work will continue on M-Trust probably until M-Trust is turned off, but these are distinct things that we want to make better. And the system is really great. I mean, Tammy has spent a lot of her time, probably 95% of her time over the past 6 years on that system as the business analyst, and it has really turned out very, very well for us. Yeah.
Yeah, we get compliments all the time from our employers how great our system is. so that's good.
And one last thing, the pace of these additional enhancements is not going to be breakneck pace. I mean, that team needs a break. Tammy primarily, and Monica, who is the test lead, Monica Arsenal, and we'll be losing Jane. She wants to really retire. We talked about a retirement once.
Might let her do it.
Right. So it'll be at I'm not going to say a leisurely pace, but it's going to be much more realistic, and it's going to be we're not gonna be looking to check those off nearly at the pace that we have up to this point. It's been a full 6 years of,
Crazy.
yeah, one deadline after another, after another, after another, so.
So it's been at a racehorse pace, and now it's gonna be a plow horse pace.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
And those costs will go into our regular operating?
Yeah.
Is that-
Yep.
Including the salary of the people, Tim.
Yes, like her full salary will return to our operating budget next year. And then like the contractor or contractors we end up working with will come to as contracted services in the regular budget.
So we don't capitalize those expenses like we do for the main software.
Right. Yep.
No, and on page 39, I have a question. I'm apparently missing something here, because you said that under investment appreciation for fiscal year 2018, we were something like 7.5%, and then 5.7%, I think you said, for fiscal year 19. Is that correct? Something like that?
Yeah, that's as of June 30th.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking is when we're showing 60 million for 2018 and then only 8.2 million for investment gains, that doesn't reflect.
Sure. So these financials here are as of August 31st, 2019,
Okay.
and compared to August 31st of 2018. The percentages that I gave you were June 30th numbers.
Mhm.
So if you think of it as, as of June 30th, 2018, we earned for that fiscal year 8.2%. But then as of June 30th, 2019, which is, these numbers, we earned 5.2%.
5.6.
Or 5,
Yeah.
Yeah.
5.7, yeah,
But the
5.7.
relationship there is maybe 60 or 70% of the gains from the previous year, but this disparity here is 80%.
So the other
What am I
thing,
missing?
$28
August.
million loss in August.
Okay.
yeah, August was, July and August are the 2 months that are reflected here.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if I'm.
It was a bad August. August, the performance in August.
The other thing to
wasn't-
keep in mind on these, we take these numbers directly out of our accounting system, the Sabres. Board of Investments are the ones who make the entries on our behalf into that system. So there's a lag often, where they don't necessarily, they may know, here's what, teacher's retirement system, we need to make this entry on their behalf for August, for their returns in August. But they might not make that entry until sometime in late September or mid-September, So that might not actually be reflected in here. There's always just a lag so they may not, so these may not be the exact numbers that they should, if that makes sense, that they should be as of, August 31st, because these are just pulled directly out of, certain account codes that are in our Sabre system. That's why, like, our June 30th numbers are accurate because, we get these numbers, we don't get them on June 30th, we get them, sometime in late July or, and then there's things that change and because of, certain CAFR adjustments that, didn't even get into the system for various OPEB-related changes and pension, like our pension, our GASB 68 numbers for the net pension liability and things. We don't get a lot of those numbers until there's a lag, quite a bit of a lag, so.
Okay. Thank you.
But, they're as accurate as we can possibly get to you, I guess,
I'm sure.
without making, estimates and stuff that are unnecessary, so.
Okay.
So the operating budget on page 41, this is as of August 31st. I actually just recently, and I didn't bring them in, but have the ones as of, September 30th also. And it's going to be, quite a bit, our budget, our regular operating budget is going to be a lot tighter this year than it has been in previous years. We're projecting a surplus, but you keep in mind that a lot of that surplus is these audit fees, and those are budgeted biannually. So really in our personal services, you know, that's a small budget projection of a, you know, surplus of 10,000 and then operating about 60,000. That's, I mean, that can be eaten into really quickly. So, so those numbers are going to be, you know, pretty tight this year, and that's why I think Sean, you know, talked about, you know, if we have additional expenses that we're not budgeted for, we're going to need budget amendments for those things. So. But we should have a surplus, you know, that came from the M-Trust budget where we didn't, you know, we were budgeted an amount that we won't use up completely. So. And then there's no delinquent agencies, you know, at this point. So that's, I think the change to requiring employers to report every single month, regardless of, you know, whether they had someone to report, has really helped. At least the accounting department, you know, we're able to identify the people who actually, you know, we need to spend some time, you know, getting a hold of and making sure that they get their reports in a lot easier than in years past. So I think that's been a huge help. So.
All right. Thank you so much. Any questions for Nolan? For all the information. NAPA report, Denise.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm sorry, once again, it feels a little like the distant past. The NAPA conference is always the last weekend in June. So, interestingly this year, and it's on our agenda today for board education on fiduciary duties, the NAPA conference was largely related to fiduciary duties, ethical responsibilities, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to cover some of the points from the NAPA conference related to our fiduciary training later, but it's always a very good conference. I always appreciate going. It's a tremendous, you know, ongoing background. It varies from year to year. In some years, there's a lot of federal level legislative changes or proposals going on. Right now, that's not the case, but there happens to be quite a lot going on in the litigation arena. And it's kind of interesting because you don't necessarily put all the pieces together until you're presented. Todd made reference this morning to Kavanaugh McDonald's involvement in the Kentucky plan and the lawsuit. Kavanaugh McDonald, as well as Ice Miller, was named as a defendant in the case for breach of fiduciary duties to the Kentucky public retirement system. And the claims against Kavanaugh McDonald were related specifically to the investment return assumption being too high and not accurately representing the funding necessary to maintain the system and that sort of thing. So there's litigation going on in that arena. One of the things that it came down to at the NAPA conference very strongly was not related to the actuarial assumption, but related to plan communications to members and stakeholders. And it's a part of the duty of care, the fiduciary duty of care, that you have to provide accurate and timely information to members. So aside from the return assumption, one of the issues, Hawaii has had some cases recently where members have sued based on lack of adequate information about the various benefit type elections that could be made and the information that needed to be provided by the plan for people to make accurate decisions about what benefit option they should elect. Specifically, the Hawaii Supreme Court applied common law fiduciary obligation of care to determine that background facts. A member filed a retirement application, elected a normal form retirement benefit. 4 days after the first benefit was paid, he died. His wife who now has no ongoing benefit payable, sued, claiming the retirement system didn't provide him adequate information about what a normal form benefit meant, and the fact that there would remain nothing payable to her upon his death as far as an ongoing monthly benefit. Case law wasn't clear. I'm assuming she got a refund of his remaining account balance, as somebody would with TRS, but not all states do that, I will say. I'm speculating that that's the case, but she prevailed in that case. The Supreme Court came back and said, and while you can imagine that on a one-by-one member basis, that's not a huge problem, but how many other people potentially lost, monthly benefits upon the death of the member, and then had a claim to make. So
What could they have done better? What were they told?
Well, that's another thing that's not entirely clear what somebody was told, but it all came down to the information that was contained in the retirement application. And the requirement essentially is you have to give people enough information for them to know what they're electing and what the repercussions of that are, and you have to give it to them at the time that it's most relevant to them to understand it. So on that particular point, I will assure you that a couple of years ago we reviewed our retirement application, and we did actually revise the descriptions of our retirement benefits specifically to make very clear what period of time benefits got paid for, and if anything remained payable to a beneficiary, how much and for how long. So specifically the issues, relevant to the benefit election you're making are in the little box you check about which benefit option you're taking with us. So, but it just sort of points out, and I will say that Hawaii is not the only state that has had recent litigation on the value and completeness and efficacy of communications from the retirement system. So, from my perspective, we are certainly where we should be, and headed in an even better direction with the fact sheets and those kinds of things that we're providing to people. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Denise, have we considered added protection, suggesting or requesting, mandating that the spouse sign off on an election?
That is required.
We already do that.
Our retirement application requires a spouse, and most plans have that.
That seems to solve the problem right there, pretty much.
Well,
legally, doesn't it?
once again, you have to make sure that the information that they're signing off on is adequate to advise them what they're taking, what they're asking for, and what they're giving up.
Okay.
So is there any personal responsibility?
Yes, because, well,
No, I mean, the individual who's retiring,
yeah.
they have no responsibility to know what they're doing?
Right. Well, our retirement application, it does include a short paragraph, probably anywhere from 2 to 4 sentences, depending on which option you're looking at, that explains what that benefit is. So I'm fairly certain that
Yes,
ours would
I
pass
think
muster
absolutely.
any day of the week.
Is it written in the form of a warning? If you take this benefit and you die, your spouse will not.
It's a
get further
description
benefit?
of what each
Yeah.
benefit is. So normal
Okay.
form, it's a single life annuity.
Yeah.
It's the highest amount available, but it's payable for one lifetime only. If
Right.
you die before your account balance is completely paid out, you get a refund, and that's it, right?
Right.
And then A, B, C.
And it specifically says nothing will remain payable to a beneficiary upon your death,
Right.
other than a refund of your account balance if there
And up to
happens
this
to be
point,
one
we've never
remaining.
had a case like that in Montana.
We've not, and I am totally comfortable that our retirement application would suffice on that particular point. I just, I throw this out to all of you by means of expressing that it's something we think about and talk about internally all the time, the level of communication provided to our members, the depth of, for example, our online beneficiary designation process now. Part of that, part of what's printed out, part of what they acknowledge that they have been given access to and have reviewed and understand is a 4-page fact sheet on beneficiary designations that clearly tells you if you designate your estate or your trust as a beneficiary, the only thing it's going to get is a refund of your accumulated contributions, no monthly benefit. So, you know, we are always walking that line between, you know, how much information people will actually read, how much, whether they read it or not. We've put it in their hands, and yes, there is some personal responsibility, but as long as we've made it available, we're in decent shape.
So I wonder, you know, in terms of educating the public, it seems like we're missing an opportunity. It's kind of complicated to try and do this, but when I looked at the choices that your members have in taking a life annuity or a joint life annuity, compared to their cash values, these are far better than they would be in the public sector. So if you took that lump sum and you created an immediate annuity in the private sector, the payout that they would get would be roughly half of what you would get through this system. So is there anything that you can
You
think
mean
of
if
where...
they bought a commercially available annuity?
Correct.
for
So
benefit?
instead of taking the annuity through this system, if they took the lump sum on purpose and then went to the private market and tried to get the same benefit, they could not do it. So is there a simple way that to educate them that is the fact?
Well, yeah, we run up against that issue every once in a while
We do,
for,
I mean,
And I always say to talk to their financial
Yeah, you
advisors,
don't wanna
because I
give them
cannot tell you
financial
how many
advice.
people tell me they could do better.
Oh, they're nuts.
And-
I know.
But I mean, it's real simple.
You talk
when
to
we
your
do it.
financial advisor, because there's no way you could do better.
therein lies the problem, and that's precisely, I mean, it's been a long-term issue with TRS that we have financial advisors telling our members all the time, cash out and buy an annuity with us or invest with us. We can do better for you than the defined benefit.
See, that is ethical, bordering on criminal.
Right.
Exactly.
And so
And I'm not kidding how many of my
Really?
peers think that that is the case.
yeah, and it's not, because if they take their contribution, it's only half to begin with, right? They don't get any of the employer contributions.
Right.
And so when the benefit officers,
That's
I
right.
mean, and I hear them meet with individuals, I hear them on the phones all the time. It's really simple, without us giving financial advice,
Right.
when we go over their estimate of benefits, we can tell them, okay, your benefit's gonna be $750 a month, you're gonna recoup your contributions that are on account with us in 3.5 years. It's a real simple, like,
Right.
okay, well, it's
Right.
really not a smart idea to take that out, right?
Yeah. The one step additional issue about, you know, again, it falls into the realm potentially of investment advice that we're not qualified to give, to sort of fight that battle of, you know, private world investment advisors saying, I can do better for you than your defined benefit. You know, we do what we can.
While we're on this point, when you do your road trip and, you know, you end up in my town, would it be legitimate for us to be able to say that to the members as part of the board? That, you know, be very careful when talking to your financial advisor, because if they give you this information, it may not be accurate. So that we can utilize that venue in order to begin to educate your members?
I think the bigger question is, are you visiting with a financial advisor, or are you visiting with someone else? Because other people have other goals in mind for your money. And one of the things that, you know, anybody that truly has gone through the financial planning education has a pretty good clue real fast what's going on. It's almost inconceivable for me to believe that a financial advisor is actually telling them that. So I've a couple times I've had to
You are
say-
a trusting soul.
Well, no, I've had to say to them, are you sure you're talking to a financial
Yeah.
advisor?
Exactly.
Because somebody that's interested in your finances, not somebody that's interested in your money,
Right.
Yes.
because that
It's
isn't
not,
my
there's
understanding
no
at all.
standard as to how to get financial advisor on a business card.
True,
Right.
absolutely true.
Yeah, so if it's a certified financial planner, then they have a fiduciary obligation to tell you the truth.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what the district put.
Yeah, if they can grab $95,000 tomorrow,
Right.
if you're 47 years old, like, oh
And
yeah,
there's
I
some
can do
really
way better
good
than
ones.
that. I've
So
just
back to
heard the
these
craziest
lawsuit
things.
things,
Yeah,
are we, I know we do tons of outreach and we have staff going out to teachers conference. You put on regular retirement seminars. Are we keeping tabs, just saying on numbers, you know, we provided X number of
Good question.
opportunities this year, advertised through X places. Here are the number of people that showed up, but here are all the things we're doing to try and educate those people in case, heaven forbid, some lawsuit comes up. I mean,
I think that's a good point.
So, another idea would sorry, you should be able to answer that question first, then I'll add another idea.
Well, and certainly we know everywhere we're going for the
Right.
retirement seminars, and we can go back and quickly figure out exactly how many people we've met throughout the year. I mean, we have that data. We collect the sheets on every one of the Ready, Set, Retire or the TRS 101 seminars, but all we're really doing there is reviewing them for comments to see if there's ways for us to improve, things they like, don't like, and then we discard them, so we're not keeping like a tally of the
I
number.
think it'd be good to keep a statistic though, just saying X number of seminars in what variety of towns, 15 different locations,
Yeah.
talked with 700 members.
Yeah.
I think,
It probably comes down to the individual though. If
Right.
it's
Right.
I mean, I'm not discounting anything you're saying
Right.
there. I think those are good.
Need to be able to show
bits of
you've provided those
information.
opportunities.
correct,
But
and
if
that's,
they didn't go to one or one wasn't
Right, that's their
available-
choice though, that's
Right.
kind of my point.
Well, but if one
we could
wasn't available
show
in
their
your
town.
town, then, you know what I mean? I think there's an argument to be made that way.
as
too.
well as online. and-
right, well, and I wanna, again, I wanna make it a little more concrete and a little more hopeful. At the point where the rubber meets the road and an individual needs to know what their rights and obligations are, I think we are making every effort to make it clearer to people, and part of this is in enhancements to statutes. We did the full-blown, if you recall, beneficiary designations, statutory changes last legislative session and that sort of thing to, you know, to clarify for people, both in law, on our fact sheets, in our letter communications, and those kinds of things, how to make those designations, what the designations means, who gets what, and those kinds of things. So just so you know, and I tell you this because these lawsuits are breach of fiduciary obligation lawsuits.
So remind me on the M-Trust update too, when somebody interacts with an individual on the phone, isn't there now a log of
Yeah, we just rolled that out,
Yeah.
where we keep a person.
where I'm going?
Yep,
Yep.
yep.
So if they ask for estimates, that's in there too, that they've been sent this information.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Right.
Yep.
and doing it automatically is great.
So I don't spend a lot of time talking about an issue that really isn't one. Let me ask you this. What percentage of your retirees at this point roughly are taking a lump sum distribution on purpose versus an annuity?
Well, if they're,
Very few. If they're vested in a benefit, it's
Right.
very few. Yeah.
Okay.
That requires
So
a
the
spousal
underfund,
sign off
yeah.
as well.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we have added a requirement for spousal sign-off on a withdrawal as well. So,
I was just thinking it might be interesting to post an article or a blog, you know, maybe written by board members that have financial expertise like me and Daniel, that if you were to evaluate private options, that at least a warning of some kind that it may very well not be in your best interest.
yeah.
Just a thought. But if the number is extremely small,
It's
then,
very low, yeah.
okay,
Thank goodness.
yeah.
It is, and probably to some extent because we strongly advise people against cashing out, against withdrawing if they're vested in, you know, if they're
Sure.
vested in a benefit. It just,
For the first and primary reason that they lose the employer contribution.
well, yes,
that's
for,
huge.
yeah, for the first and primary reason that you exceed, your benefits exceed your contributions to the retirement system in almost all cases within between 3.5 and 5 years.
Yeah.
After that, it's all, you know, pure profit to you, investment returns,
So to
et cetera.
Have we ever had an
Yes.
article on option 1 versus option 2, the highest annuity versus the joint life, or any discussion of that? That could be an article we could have too. Maybe that was the original conversation I think we were having.
Yeah.
With an idea, like, here's a story of someone who died 4 days after, and here's what happened to them. Something like that to scare people into maybe making a more conservative choice if they're married.
Yeah, and to some extent, I think that may be a more critical kind of issue to hit because, things change over time. And in the non-public retirement system world, the expectation and what people's experiences have been is that spouse has a legal right to a portion of the benefit, or do you know what I'm saying? In public pension or in public safety systems, the spouse, there can't be a normal form benefit elected if the member is married. The spouse has a right to a joint and survivor annuity option, essentially, without signing off. The spouse has. So people have expectations from other areas of their lives about what a spouse has a right to and that sort of thing that don't necessarily follow under our statute. So yes, we're
Right, but our retirement act requires the spouse
Correct,
to sign.
right.
It has to be notarized.
Yep. We're doing what we need to do. Absolutely.
Sounds pretty ironclad to me.
Nothing's ever ironclad, but we work hard to make it, as meaningful to our members as possible. So, I will leave it there unless other people have, as far as the NAPA, we'll talk fiduciary duties
Other
again.
things. All right. Then we're down to the tentative meeting dates, and looking ahead to December 6th. Let's please go there. Thank you. All right. All right, well, December 6th for sure, and then the next one out is February 14th, May 8th, just having that on your schedule. February 14th is Valentine's Day.
I made note of that.
Sheesh.
However, if you bring your significant other with you, you can have a long weekend.
There you go.
In beautiful downtown Helena?
In wherever between your home and here,
Yeah.
on the way back, in Helena, whatever.
Okay, so the 6th is good for sure.
Yeah.
And then-
Yeah.
okay.
And her birthday's the 18th, so.
Right. Okay, then public comment. Anything else, Diane? All right, I don't want to forget. So we'll
Can't
go
we
on.
have the February meetings in Scottsdale?
That would be
There you go.
Board training. We'll get some training in golf.
Right,
or
I like
something. So we're on to the executive director's report.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the board, on page 45 behind tab 6, I have just a brief write-up on the couple of topics for the director's report. The first one is in August. I don't believe I had a chance, I think I mentioned it, but I know I didn't put anything in the board packet. You've all met JC, who's the receptionist out front now. She joined TRS on June 17th, which that position became vacant as a result of Christian applying for and receiving the job that Kim Lloyd left when she retired. So we haven't really had any changes. But I don't think I specifically called out that staff update last time. Item number 2 is the 6th Avenue update, and I did attach it's just a one-page, real brief summary and schedule for the remodel work to be done on the 1500 East 6th Avenue building. I've since received about a 20-page schematic drawing and full explanation of everything. So things are moving ahead on that and looking good. Should be able to come in under budget and hopefully have that building ready for occupancy in April-May timeframe of 2020. So not that far out. And at least initially, we'll look to lease it out until I can figure out a way to sell it to somebody, like the Board of Investments or someone like that.
Probably not. You still have a potential.
Yes, we have, I think, a tenant lined up. Everything seems to be holding there, so worst case, we'll lease it out. for some period of time, but their talks continue about potential suitors, whether it be Department of Admin or Board of Investments or somebody else. All right, and then item number 3, so after our strategic planning meeting, I went ahead and I reached out to Kirk Miller at School Administrators of Montana, and he gave me a little plug during his webinar that he has once a month with all the superintendents across the state, and within a couple days, I was able to set up
Wow, you
dates
are
and times that I'm going to travel around and meet with each of the 9 regional superintendent groups, and so I've got the schedule laid out here, and the city I'll be in. And so earlier Dan had asked me about when we meet with members, or when I hit the road to meet with members. So these will be specifically to meet with the superintendents.
Okay.
And I've only been to the NEMAS meeting previously. I've done that the last, I think, 5 years. Denise went 1 year for me, because I had something else planned. But that group's only about, I would say, 15 individuals. I'm not sure, some of the other regions might be bigger than that, but I'll know a lot more after I get back from these meetings. And it'll be nice to put a face to the name and actually meet some of these guys in person and gals. And so,
Did you want us to try and attend any of these when you're in our area, or does it?
You certainly could. I mean, I plan to talk a little bit about the funded status of the plan, and then what I wanted the conversation to go is I want to sort of have a conversation with them about the teacher shortage that they're having, if they're experiencing that, and get it in their head to try to plug the system as a recruitment tool and a retention tool, the retirement system. Make sure they understand that it's deferred compensation. They're the ones that have the opportunity to promote it when they're speaking to potential new hires. Where we certainly honk or toot our own horn, but it's always after the fact, after somebody's already a member, where if they do go to career fairs, or if their HR person goes to career fairs, I think they need to remember that it's a benefit that most people don't get in the private sector anymore. So
Actually, it's one of those things that they should be. They complain quite a bit, but they need to be able to do this, that, or whatever else to improve retention and whatever. They're not taking advantage of selling this at all.
right.
So I think
That's my general impression too, is that it's kind of just goes, they don't really talk about it or think about it.
They probably really don't know how to approach it. I mean, they've never been given 5 minutes of marketing on what it means to teachers, and how to talk to them about it.
And even at the very beginning of my career, I swear, I had people sit me down and say, do you know what you have here? And when you're young, you don't care.
Right.
But I was grateful to have had that.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I really did realize that I was, even when after I had children and thought about leaving for a little bit, I thought, no way, I'm not going to get rid of this benefit in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
Yeah, and we're in private sector. Do you get a matching benefit from your employer of 50 or 60% of your retirement contributions? Give me a break.
Yeah,
Match up to 5%.
doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. That's quite a busy schedule for you, but thank you for doing that. That's really a great outreach for us.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, we had talked about it in August. I actually wouldn't mind doing this every other year. Obviously during a legislative year it would be hard to pull this off, but in non-legislative years, it seems like it would be a good idea.
Well, honestly, I think with the superintendents, we kind of have to, work with them a little bit.
Yeah, we do.
Because we can tend to be on the opposite side of them quite often because of this understanding. So I appreciate that.
Payroll clerks are another group that if we could educate them more, sometimes I think they are the ones that when somebody has a question about what's happening to this money that's on this pay stub that's being removed from my check, to have them presented a little bit more
And business officers,
Right.
in the bigger districts.
positively versus, oh, then you have to pay that.
Yeah.
We don't have any choice.
I think they should present the phone number for TRS.
Yes.
Right.
At that
Well,
point.
they do, you're right, they answer a lot of questions and.
Not always correct.
And not always correctly, and it's a position that turns over pretty regularly.
Yeah.
So Nolan does go to it's Maslow, right?
Maslow.
And every year he does new clerk training. Do you have 2 presentations or just one? Just the new clerk?
Well, usually a couple different ones.
Yeah, a couple of them, and so.
Okay, well, that's good.
We do, I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't possibly more that can be done, but
And they have to
it's an
show up to
area.
get the training.
But-
Yeah.
They
You should go
do.
to every district.
This is,
Yeah.
this is exactly why our TRS 101 stuff is so important, because I think you can link all of these kinds of things to that and give them
Yeah.
something to grab onto.
And
Because I can only tell you, our business manager is one thing, but our payroll person, sometimes she can be the most negative thing in the world. And
No.
she has gone to Masbo for the last 20 years and has heard all of this. And it's like, I'm sorry.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the TRS 101 presentation that Darla does link some of that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
For sure, so,
Absolutely.
I mean, for people that are earlier mid-career, if they'll just take the time to either watch that on our website or come to one in person, I mean, it's a really good presentation. It tells them this is what you're gaining by working in a defined benefit covered position. So.
I share it with our new teachers, if that helps.
Everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so, let's see, we are on to, any public comment there, Diane? Great. So we are on to fiduciary training. And that's with you, Denise.
So I'm going to make this quick. The documents that you have here are the documents that you all should have received at one point in your board member handbooks. We also do, and will do in December, again, the ethics/fiduciary training with the annual statement or report of conflicts of interest statement. So you're going to all be seeing something about fiduciary duties and conflicts of interest again in December. So I don't want to belabor this too much at this point. In fact, you will be seeing that policy, the ethics and conflict of interest policy, with just some basic modifications to correct the cross references to current administrative rule numbers as well. So again, a fiduciary is a person who owns property that's entrusted for the benefit of another. You are statutorily fiduciaries of the retirement system under the Montana Constitution. You would be deemed to be that under common law principles, trust and trustee principles in any case. And of course, the people with beneficial interests in the property that you hold title to essentially are our members and their beneficiaries. So that, there's a little bit of conflict there to the extent that we talk about beneficiaries with respect to fiduciary duties. We're primarily talking about our members. Of course, we have a whole other level of beneficiaries as well. What are fiduciary duties and where do they come from? Fiduciary duties are the responsibilities and obligations of fiduciaries that are put in place to ensure that you're using the property you're given title to for the benefit of the people who are entitled to the benefit of it, not for yourselves or other people that you might like to benefit by that property. Fiduciary duties come from a number of legal sources. Again, there is, and I believe this document refers to the history of this country, fiduciary duties arising under common law through the history of this country. In fact, it goes back to British common law, where, American common law came from initially. So there is a long, long legal history of description and definition of fiduciary duties. state and federal law have codified some of the norms of fiduciary duties. In fact, some of the IRS qualification standards we specifically have to comply with are essentially qualification standards derived from specific fiduciary duties. The primary example would be the exclusive benefit rule, which is a specific requirement under 401A of the IRC, the Internal Revenue Code. Qualification standard that applies to us comes from the duty of loyalty, the common law fiduciary duty of loyalty. For most pension plans, or private, world pension plans, fiduciary duties are codified in ERISA, a 1974 law that laid out parameters for the conduct of private pension plans, again, to ensure the safety and stability of the pension funds to benefit the people that they're intended to benefit. ERISA doesn't apply to us. We're a governmental plan. Strictly speaking, ERISA does not apply to us, but case law across the country, there's not, of course, Montana doesn't have a lot of case law on complex commercial kinds of issues, so there's not a lot here, but across the country, the ERISA standards for fiduciary duties are so representative of the obligations and functioning of pension plans that they're relied on by judges pretty uniformly as precedent, both for governmental plans and for private plans. So, when you have an ERISA case that establishes a change in fiduciary duties or a particular application, if you're in that jurisdiction, that's probably going to apply to you as well. So we always look at those. The enforcement mechanisms for fiduciary duties are a number of things. First and foremost, for all of you, our internal compliance efforts. You understand your fiduciary duties. We incorporate those in how we do business. You receive education. Board training and education is a huge factor in establishing your knowledge of and compliance with your fiduciary duties. So both what we do here internally, when you attend the NCTR conference and that sort of thing, I'm guessing you fairly routinely have some fiduciary duty training, fiduciary obligation kinds of training at NCTR. Audits and other reviews. So for example, when the qualification letter process was something we routinely participated in, a part of that was to make sure, a part of that review by the IRS was to make sure that we had the required provisions in our laws and in TRS statutes that say we comply with our fiduciary obligations, again, as an example, with the exclusive benefit rule, right? We hold our assets in trust for the payment of benefits to our members and their beneficiaries and the satisfaction of appropriate administrative costs. So, we can be audited by the IRS, we can be audited by state legislative fiscal, or legislative auditor, does compliance review audits with TRS every other year as well. A part of that is to make sure, and it certainly can be, to make sure that we're conducting our business in conformity with all of our statutes, including our expressions of our fiduciary obligations. And then, of course, the one that you want to avoid is legal action. And again, from the NAB conference, what's trending in legal actions against public retirement systems? Trends. I mean, you'll go through years where funding is the issue, whether the system is adequately funded, whether the state is taking contribution holidays or that sort of thing. Right now, there are a number of breach of fiduciary obligation lawsuits. And of course, this underlying subject matter can be all over the board. But recent litigation, again, has involved choice of actuarial assumptions, including the investment return assumption and adequacy of information to beneficiaries. Kentucky Hawaii, they're, you know, and they're not the only states that have been involved recently. 4 primary fiduciary duties. Duty of loyalty. Loyalty is the exclusive benefit rule to us. We do what we do for the benefit of our members and not for anybody else's benefit. So at the NAPA conference, one of the things that they had, a number of the breach of fiduciary obligations is, well, I shouldn't say the litigation, but one of the things that was a strong recommendation was that for a period of time around the 2008-2009 Great Recession, the sharp market decline, you had all kinds of states that were amending their plans to reduce their outflow from benefits, to increase their contributions, reduce their GABAs or their COLAs or whatever they called them. There was a whole lot of legislator education that accompanied those kinds of things. And it's interesting, Diane's not in the room right now, but I think she would say to you that in the last legislative session, it feels like we have lost a little bit of that underlying legislator understanding about the fiduciary obligations of the pension plan and how those relate to benefit changes or plan changes that they may be contemplating making. And apparently that is something that's being seen across the country, that everybody is having to go through, and their recommendation was, you know, be cognizant of the fact that you may have kind of a renewed need to provide education and advice to legislators regarding fiduciary obligations related to the retirement systems and that sort of thing, because, you know, people leave the legislature, new people come in, and the level of understanding isn't always the same. Ultimately, for all of you, the duty of loyalty means, as a TRS board member, that you're required to exercise your authority with respect to the retirement system with only the best interests of our members in mind. And I always kind of reference this as the we don't wear two hats thing. We don't represent people in matters that that we can reasonably foresee will come before this board, where their interests may be adverse to the obligations and responsibilities of the TRS board or the retirement system in general. You know, there's a whole gamut, and again, next month when we go through the conflict of interests policy, we'll go over that in greater detail. After the duty of loyalty, the duty of impartiality means that, you know, essentially, we treat all similarly situated members the same. We keep all of our members' best interests in mind, but we don't act in the best interests of a single TRS member. We treat all TRS members similarly. The duty of delegation. In old trust law, the requirement in common trust law going back hundreds of years, the expectation was the trustee was the expert. The duty of delegation was essentially a duty against delegation. You didn't entrust other people to do functions for which a trustee's expertise was necessary. As the world has gotten more complicated, the duty of delegation has actually become a duty to delegate, to hire competent staff, to hire competent third-party experts, contractors, etc., to do the functions that you yourself, as an individual board member or the board as a whole, is not fully qualified to do on your own. I think, you know, we got those things covered. Closely related to the duty of delegation is the duty of care and prudence. Part of the duty of care is your responsibility to make sure the people you are delegating to are actually competent and qualified to perform the functions and duties that you're delegating to them. So, you know, to some extent, this sort of gets back to the Board of Investments and the TRS Board. Now, we don't have any legal ability or authority to say somebody else is going to do the investing for the TRS board. But do you have an obligation to know what the Board of Investments is doing, to comment on what they're doing if you believe that something that's happening is not, it falls outside of the correct application of fiduciary duties? Absolutely. But I think, again, Montana law anticipates that. We have a board member on the Board of Investments. You know, we stay apprised of what happens with the Board of Investments, and I think we are perfectly fine there as well. Very quickly, conflict of interest. Conflict of interest arises where there is a personal, professional, or commercial interest or relationship that might reasonably be perceived as diminishing your independence of judgment in the conduct of TRS business. It doesn't actually have to exist. In other words, somebody does not have to prove that you did something for the benefit of somebody else and intended to do that to prove that you have a conflict of interest. A relationship that would give a reasonable appearance of a conflict of interest is enough to create a conflict of interest that needs to be addressed. In circumstances where there is not an actual conflict of interest, you're not going to act adverse to the interests of the retirement system in deference to a third person. In many circumstances, a conflict is mitigated simply by putting it on the record and by taking reasonable steps to make sure that what appears to potentially be a conflict is not actually a conflict. If there's an actual conflict of interest, that doesn't necessarily mean you can't serve on the TRS board. It just means you cannot act in the capacities. So, for example, every time we do disability determinations, we figure out if you individually have a conflict of interest, a personal relationship with the person making the claim, etc. And not just disability applications, any circumstance where an individual comes before the board, we're looking at those things as well. There are exceptions to the prohibition against conflicts of interest, and I don't mean that there are exceptions. If there's a conflict, it has to be addressed and mitigated. But there are certain circumstances where, with people looking from the outside, there would be an assumption of a conflict of interest that isn't necessarily, there's a legal exception to it. The fact that many of you are not only board members of TRS, you're active or retired members and beneficiaries of TRS. There are people from the outside who would say that's a conflict of interest. You're going to make the decision as a board member that's in your best interests and not necessarily in the best interests of our membership as a whole. Your dual capacity in that respect is not a conflict of interest as long as your interest in a particular situation is no different than the majority of membership of TRS in general. So, if there's any speculation or assumption or implication that any of you are doing what is in your best interests as a member of the retirement system, frankly, in the years I've been here, I've certainly not seen it. So it is not flat out a legal conflict of interest. We get a little closer when we get to the point where we have people who, a fiduciary who's a member or officer of a union or employee organization. If the fiduciary participates as a member of that third party, and there will likely be a conflict of interest if the fiduciary, as a union officer or representative or employer representative, directly represents or has represented a plan member or members in a matter that is before the retirement system. And I would throw in there, or could be before the retirement system. So we talk about that in our conflict of interest training as well, that you don't individually represent members of the teacher's retirement system in matters that could come before the board as a whole. And in the circumstances where that might happen, then you're going to be precluded from acting as a board member in those matters. What to do if you think you have a conflict of interest? You talk to the board chair, you talk to Sean, or you talk to me as soon as you are aware of a circumstance that you think may constitute a conflict of interest. We have to address it and we have to take appropriate steps to mitigate it. Again, that doesn't mean you're no longer on the board. Doesn't mean you don't sit as a board member, but you may not participate in the consideration of that particular matter and may not vote on it. Easy enough. We put it on the record, we do what we need to do, and we get on with our lives. So, any questions? I'm sorry.
It's good.
90 miles, not new information to anybody, but, good
Need to hear
to.
it.
You do it.
Go
You do
ahead.
it at least once
Need
a
to
year.
hear it, yes.
Yep.
Thanks, Denise.
And real quick, so when you go to the trustee workshop, you probably get quite a bit of fiduciary, or at least, I would think at least a session or two of fiduciary
Yes.
training. But like the annual conference, a lot of times there isn't necessarily anything.
Generally, isn't.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, there have been, in both three that I've attended, fiduciary sessions.
Yeah,
And a lot of them are different than us because they invest.
right.
And so they're talking about things that don't, deal with us, but it's still interesting to
Yeah.
hear where they're at. So we're on to regular survivorship adjustments and corrections.
Okay, so, Madam Chair, members of the board, behind tab 8, you'll find the quarterly board report, which reflects all of the retirements between 4/1 of 2019 and 8/31 of 19. So it's a big one. I think it summarized on page 70. We had 521 retirees during that time period, which obviously that's the vast majority of our retirees for the year. I think we usually have around 650 in a 12-month period. So they, as you might expect, they come through between May and August.
So 47 years, those are,
Yeah, wow.
that was one of ours.
Yeah, yep. What else? The average overall was 25.5 years of service. Average age was 61.55 years of age, and the average monthly benefit was $2,341 per month. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Otherwise, that's the summary report.
Right? And Denise, we're on to legal issues.
So we have now 2 contested matters pending. First, Edward Zabrocki. I'm not exactly sure, I'm sorry, I'm not recalling the timing specifically. I think the last board meeting that I did a legal update, there had been a motion to dismiss. We had filed a motion to dismiss Mr. Zabrocki's claims under the Declaratory Judgment Act. He was wanting to bring in evidence of violation of the constitutional separation between church and state, alleging that Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch is a sectarian enterprise. I won't go into all of the details of the legal arguments, but we filed a motion to dismiss that because, of course, that was a part of your final determination. We filed a motion in limine just prior to the hearing with the hearings examiner in the case to prevent that issue from being heard by the hearings examiner because you're not qualified. Nor do you have the legal authority, jurisdiction to determine a constitutional question like that. You expressly attached the hearings examiner's order on that motion in limine as part of your final decision in this matter, and our motion to dismiss that issue was granted. So Sean says to me, that means this is all over with? I said, no.
No.
I said,
Unfortunately.
nice, hopeful question, but no. So at this point, we're still waiting. The time has not run to determine whether Mr. Zabrocki is going to appeal that dismissal of that claim directly to the Supreme Court. I wouldn't be surprised if he does. If he does not, then the next step in the process would be an overall briefing schedule set by Judge Minahan on the underlying issues in the case. So
6+ years.
2008 plus years, 2011,
Right.
yeah. So,
Primary beneficiaries, the attorneys.
Yeah.
Exactly, in this case.
yeah. So anyway, that continues on. Again, because there is an outside possibility that something would be remanded back to this board on that case, we won't, I give you a procedural update about what's going on. We won't talk about the facts and law because the ex parte communication prohibition may come back into effect if something comes back to you in that case. So the other contested matter that we have pending now is the Mark Thane matter. A hearings examiner was requested by us, has been appointed by by John Melcher at Agency Legal Services. The hearings examiner in the case's name is an attorney at Agency Legal Services named Christopher Abbott. The first step in the scheduling is for preliminary statements to be submitted by the two parties by next Friday, by October 19th, 18th. It's today the 11th, I'm sorry, yes. So October 18th is the preliminary statement. After that, all of the regular process, discovery.
We are not the hearings examiners, but that would come back to.
Right.
An ex parte, right, you are not the hearings examiner, but again, the ex parte communications prohibition applies to this case as well, because you will, once the hearings examiner gets through the process and issues a proposed order, you will be making the final call on findings of fact and conclusions of law. So, just sort of the standard process.
And we still have the same retained counsel.
We do, the Drake Law Firm, correct. What I can just tell you, for those of you who've been here a long time, Mr. Ferrier has recently submitted
Don't talk about 8 years.
a new one.
Yeah, no kidding.
2005, 2003, somewhere in there. 1999,
No,
actually.
1999.
1999,
This is
yes.
It's been
2004 and
20
it was already going.
Yep,
Yeah.
he might have been on the agenda by my very first.
Yeah. So, he has
So there's
asked.
no basis about that one?
No, well, he has asked to come and talk to the board on the last communication and that he sent us and the response that we sent him. I think, he will be here on December 6th
Oh,
to talk to you. So we will give you will, in the packet, you will get his communications, our response, and,
Background information for those that don't know,
yeah,
what the case was
Yeah.
about and the
Yeah.
outcome.
yes, right,
So you can listen and have an understanding of what's going on.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will our attorney be calling us before that meeting to discuss it?
No,
or-
no, in this, meaning the Drake Law Firm?
Yeah.
No, on this case, at
It won't
this
be an action
point,
item, right? Because there's nothing, he just wants to talk to us.
What is it at this point that gives him the ability to even ask for our time to do that?
he's a benefit recipient. He's now retired and receiving a benefit subject to an actuarial reduction to recover the benefits that we paid to him that he wasn't entitled to receive. And again, as everybody's indicated, this is a long history.
Yeah.
We've been to the Supreme Court with him 3 times, and then to district court a subsequent time after the 3rd trip to the Supreme Court. I'm just going to say simply, he wants to keep reconsidering issues that have already been decided, and essentially that's the position that TRS staff is taking, and that's what you'll be talking to Mr. Ferrier about in December. Or at least hearing from
That's what
him.
we'll be hearing about.
Correct.
Yeah, at least that's what we believe you'll hear
It'll be
about.
relatively difficult to get a word in edgewise.
Okay.
Just fair warning.
but it might be best just to listen.
Exactly.
And send him on his little very little
So
way.
thank you for the information.
The reality is he's got every legal right
He does.
Whether
He
he's-
does,
whether-
that's
whether
exactly.
Any of our retired members can do
Yeah.
that. We have a spot open on every agenda for the
Yeah.
public to talk, so it's reasonable.
And the reason he has a right to come to, before the board is because there really is no limitation in our law with respect to issues that members can. Now, what you can do to alleviate somebody's concerns or address the request they've made to you can certainly be constrained by TRS law, prior judicial determinations, that sort of thing. And we'll certainly advise you about those parameters and limitations.
So I'm just wondering, Denise, just as a general thing, could somebody take advantage of that to the point where they would show up at every board meeting on an indefinite basis? I don't, it may have never happened,
Well, this one was pretty close.
but was it? Jeez.
So we always have public comment at our
Right.
board meetings. Somebody could always come, and I mean, if it's a matter as Carrie says before each meeting, if it's something that action is required on, or the board has to make a decision on, it has to be publicly noticed for a future board meeting. This one will be, publicly noticed.
Okay.
But, so, yeah, it's,
Right, I mean, at this point, we don't even have a specific request other than, he was, for whatever reason, was under the understanding, and it felt wrongly, let me point that out, that his benefit would be reinstated to what it should have been after some period of time, meant that he thought had passed, and well, that was not the case, so it has gone, from, we've
There has
received three
never
different.
been a discussion in regard
Right.
to any of that kind of stuff.
Well, there's, in the record, there's plenty, he was invited to come meet with the TRS board to talk about a repayment schedule. He never showed up for either of those. He was invited more than once and didn't do that. So what happened is his benefit was actually really reduced for the rest of his life so that the system could be repaid. So, yeah.
All right,
Yeah, okay.
we've got things on the agenda list on there.
Yeah, and it doesn't fit in our legal counsel report, but I'm also having Brett Dahl, who's the head of, it's not risk management toward, it's the
risk
cyber-
management.
Yeah, it's risk management toward the cybersecurity. He's going to come and present for about an hour and a half to the board next board meeting. So, on cyber security and cyber insurance and where we stand.
Make sure there's 2 lots of copies.
Oh, but it's an important issue, and it's one of those things, especially every time you go to an annual conference, and that's one of the big scare not scare tactics. It's one of the real things systems are facing. So it'd be good for us to understand as fiduciaries what we have. So, okay, sorry.
No, you're fine. I guess we just have election of the board chair and vice chair, or everything, right? Election of officers and budget committee appointments, and this is an action item.
Congratulations.
Can you just make a motion to leave everybody right where they are? And
You just did.
Dan did last time.
Yes.
okay, so I make a motion that we maintain our current positions on committees and chair and vice chair.
No one else wants to
Seconded.
do this illustrious job.
You're too good at it.
Yeah.
We don't, yeah.
It's completely up to
It would be a
You
Yes,
are
letdown.
but I'm
very
like-
good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
So,
All
I
right.
second it.
Been moved and seconded to keep the current
officers
and committees. Thank you. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye as well. Yeah, exactly. It's just me. I have a football team. All right, we need a motion for adjournment.
Wait.
Oh, any,
One announcement I have to make.
oh.
I did finally get that grandbaby.
Oh,
2.5 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Awesome.
Happy little boy.
Wonderful. What's his name?
Jariah.
Jariah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations,
awesome.
Grandpa.
Jeria.
Jariaya.
Wow.
Yeah.
He's gonna have a hard time in kindergarten.
It's Jariah Jeffries.
Okay.
Oh.
JJ,
However-
we call it JJ.
Cool.
Yeah,
I love it.
that's wonderful.
Congratulations.
Awesome.
What date?
Was the 5th? Does that sound right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So 2 sons and a grandson too.
3 sons.
3 sons and a grandson.
Yeah.
So not a little girl yet. Awesome.
Okay, now I would make the motion to adjourn.
Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well.